Okay, I think we're live. Welcome everyone to the February 24th, 2024 edition of Saturday Free School. We're missing a few people today, but also gained some people today. Joe, our friend in the free school, who's coming back from Korea. But yeah, I'll pass it over to Doc first to talk about W.E.B. Du Bois's recent birth anniversary, which was yesterday.
Yeah, Du Bois's 156th birthday was yesterday.
Yeah.
And, since we're so much a part of Du Bois and his body of work, I don't know, we're celebrating him every day, every week.
Yeah.
But this time last year, we were having the conference on Black Reconstruction, which I still think stands up, and I think a lot of people have learned from what we're doing with Black Reconstruction, have gotten a clearer point of view about the revolutionary character of the book. And so I just wanted to say that. I just want to say one other thing. Philadelphia is a different place because the Free School has championed W.E.B. Du Bois, and even the opponents of Du Bois now are claiming Du Bois. But they claim the name or a picture of him, but not his substance and his meaning or his revolutionary contribution for the 21st century. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I was thinking about Black Reconstruction like yesterday and today too, and I feel like, yeah, I agree that part of it is just that even if we're not saying Du Bois's name explicitly in a certain conversation, that basically that Du Bois forms a huge part of our assumptions and our worldview, and especially going into this upcoming year of Baldwin and also the year of the election. And yeah, so basically today we're going to be talking about like two main things, one of which was the Abandon Biden press conference, which took place this past Monday at Independence Hall, and also talk about in the context of the election overall. And then obviously we're going to be assessing the inauguration of the Year of James Baldwin, which took place last Saturday. But yeah, even going back to Du Bois, I think like part of what I was thinking about with Black Reconstruction is that essentially it is a study of revolution, but even like more concretely, it's a study of like what happens in a political crisis and what political realignments develop through the course of that crisis. And I think like one of the things that stands out from Black Reconstruction is how much basically during the Civil War and Reconstruction period, everything was in flux. Like nothing was stable. And you had these like shifting alliances, shifting kind of coalitions, especially like the relationship between the Black worker and the white worker, which was it wasn't a set thing. It was a fluid thing that was always changing throughout the period. And so basically, like Du Bois is making the point that in moments of uncertainty, there exists profound new possibilities, because in a moment of uncertainty, that's also when the choices that people make, the actions that people make become even more important, because nothing is really set in stone. But yeah, I was just thinking about that in the context even of the Abandoned Biden thing, which I can kind of talk about since Doc and I went there. But I also wanted to kind of frame it in the context of obviously like the 2024 presidential race, which we've been talking about for the past couple months. And just basically like where we're at right now is that we're about like 6 months, like 5 or 6 months to the Democratic Party convention, which is happening in Chicago in August. And we've said this before, but this convention, I think, will be, like rocked, like you were saying, Doc, by massive protests. And there are very sharp echoes of the 1968 Democratic Convention, which was also in Chicago, which people may remember, in which basically LBJ had dropped out as the incumbent. And this was, I think, basically because he was facing internal dissent within the Democratic Party over the Vietnam War. And then RFK Sr. looked likely to be the nominee because he had just won the California primary, then he was assassinated. And basically at the 1968 convention, you had, I saw on Wikipedia, they were saying it was like 10,000 protesters, mostly representing kind of like, it's safe to say it's like kind of like the white anti-war movement. Youth, like youth movement, students, basically who showed up. There was like these intense clashes with the police, like a lot of people were arrested, a lot of people were injured. And that also, while that was happening outside of the convention, there was like almost like a riot within the convention, because at that point, like there were multiple nominees for the Democratic ticket, and there was basically all these delegates showed up, and what happened was like an open convention in which like none of the delegates were necessarily committed to a particular candidate. And so like essentially it was like a riot. But then what ended up happening is that they nominated, like at the end of the day, they nominated who I think was kind of the more establishment, like kind of pro-war candidate out of the field, especially after RFK had been assassinated. And then ultimately, the Democrats ended up losing to Richard Nixon in the GOP. But yeah, just to go back to like where we're at now, I think basically what we're kind of seeing with the size and intensity of protests in the United States in this moment with the war in Gaza is that the protests at the convention, regardless of what happens, will likely see like larger numbers and more intense mass protests, I think, in 2024 compared to that 1968 convention, which already kind of has a particular place in history as being a moment of like huge instability for the nation and also, specifically for the Democratic Party. But yeah, I think the big question that many of us are kind of thinking about is whether Biden will actually be the nominee for the Democrats in 2024. And I think people have different estimates of this. And I feel like right now it's kind of like almost like 50-50, like whether he'll actually, I'm not really a betting person, so I don't really have precise odds, but like there's a lot of chatter and a lot of kind of moves that I think are happening on either side of like people who are pushing for Biden to basically drop out, people who are basically saying, no, like we have to lock this down, we have to have stability. But essentially what can possibly happen in terms of actual outcomes is that, like, let's say if Biden is pushed out early, let's say like next month or in April, then what the Democrats could do is that they could, essentially rally behind like one candidate, like Kamala Harris, for instance, before the convention, and basically kind of go through like what feels like a more normal process where you just are, coming together to basically push forward like one candidate. Ezra Klein, who is like a big opinion writer at the New York Times, has also suggested that what could happen, or what the Democrats should, he's actually recommended this, is that the Democrats should try to have an open convention like 1968, in which you have essentially like multiple candidates who all show up. The delegates who show up to the convention, it's like 4,000 delegates, they're uncommitted, and that they select a candidate right then and there. And basically this would make for like really good television. I think like it would be very fascinating, and I think a lot of people would be watching, but it'd also be a complete mess for the Democratic Party. Like there's a lot of, this is something that they haven't done since 1968 because of how chaotic it was. And they moved to this system where it's just, they select a candidate through the primaries, and then basically by the time you get to the convention, it's essentially locked away. And that's because of 1968. And I think that regardless of what will happen, I think, like whether it's like Ezra Klein in the New York Times or other kind of people in the media, I think that these are all signs that the ruling class is worried. They're very worried, and they're anxious and fearful that Biden is going to lose to Trump. And at the same time, like Doc and I were talking yesterday, but there is still, I think, a strong case for the Democrats to keep Biden in the race. The main reason for that is that there's a huge amount of kind of political and financial infrastructure surrounding Biden and surrounding Biden as a candidate and as kind of like a figure within the Democratic machine, basically. And then kind of, I guess, like the unexpected or the human factor is that because Biden is like an old guy who has dementia, honestly, I feel like it's more likely that he'll become more stubborn and more resistant and irritable to people trying to push him out. The more that people say it, and you kind of got like a sense of this when he did that kind of unannounced press conference a few weeks ago, I think, where he was like, "I'm fine, like I don't have any problems," and then right, like, and then a few seconds later, he was like, I just talked with the president of Mexico, El Sisi, and,
Who's the president of
actually the
Egypt?
president of Egypt. So that didn't really help his case. But, basically Biden's whole thing, he's angry. He doesn't like that people are questioning his age, even aside from the Gaza stuff. And, yeah, so there's a possibility that he'll become, even as personally much more entrenched and be like, no, I'm going to do it. And basically F all you guys. But basically where the Democrats are at is that regardless of what happens, whether Biden drops out, whether they try to push someone new, Democrats are running a really weak hand in the election. Where, even if it's easier to stay with Biden in the long run, a lot of people hate Biden for many different reasons. That's also partly due to tensions within the Democratic Party between different factions, like the Obama faction, which kind of backs Kamala, and then the Clinton faction, which is much more established within the party and is also a lot stronger. But kind of regardless of those tensions, I think something that we've talked about a lot and that we're very clear on is that the ruling class is essentially united in wanting to keep Trump out of office. And I just saw news this morning that because Trump is being kind of doused in all of these cases in New York and Georgia and all these states where I think right now I estimated he's being charged to pay between $450 and $530 million for a kind of combination of different cases that are going on, due to fraud and all this stuff. And I think that basically the ruling class, all of these institutional efforts to basically remove Trump from the race, or even at best to sabotage Trump in the 2024 election, reflect what we've also talked about in Free School, which is kind of a very schizophrenic hysteria around Trump on the part of the ruling class, in which on the one hand, the elites feel almost intuitively and instinctively that Trump represents for them an existential crisis where, aside from any given policy that Trump may pursue, Trump basically to the elite is a manifestation of the elite's own crisis of legitimacy, and that this is what makes them so uncomfortable about Trump, and is also the reason why they go to these hysterics about, oh, if Trump wins, it'll be the death of democracy and all this stuff, and kind of this apocalyptic language. But then kind of the schizophrenic nature of it is that at the same time, the elites want to kind of act as if they're still in control of everything. And so they're also trying to spin this oh, it's just another election, we can handle it. And this is, I think, themselves trying to reassure themselves more than anything. But basically the fact remains that in all swing states, Trump is consistently leading Biden. He's been leading Biden for the past few months. That's Michigan, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, I think other swing states. And so that basically, so that's kind of the context I want to give for the Abandon Biden event that we went to, where this whole Abandon Biden movement was started in Michigan by basically the Muslim community there. And I think Michigan is home to kind of one of the biggest Muslim populations in the country. And now they're actively taking it to other swing states. So the event that we went to this past Monday was them announcing that they're going to start this campaign in Pennsylvania. And I don't know, it was a really small gathering, because I think it was basically just a press conference. It wasn't really widely publicized at all, although I think someone from the Inquirer was there and wrote an article about it. But basically, the people who spoke were kind of representatives from the Muslim community, but both the Arab and the Black Muslim community in Philadelphia. So there was a local imam from Delaware County. There was a young Black woman who was a student, I think, at Drexel University. There was an older Black woman who I think was a former Pennsylvania state representative. And they were all Muslim, but different strands of the Muslim community, especially the African American Muslim community. And I think that we were talking about this, but I think this is a very important sign and an important move, because especially in the swing states, and especially in a state like Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, where in Philly we have such a huge Black Muslim population, the Muslim community can have an actual decisive impact in the swing states in particular. And kind of how I felt about it was what people actually said was that a lot of the messages were very strong. I think people had a very strong sense of almost moral conviction to what they were saying. The messages were not uniform, which actually I think is a good thing, because it was a sign that this movement is pulling together many different strands of politically and socially from the broader Muslim community, but that they're united around this basic sense of unity that we have a moral responsibility to act to stop the genocide in Gaza, and that we also have a responsibility basically to expose the Biden administration's abandonment of the American people in favor of basically waging wars around the world. And so, yeah, like it was really interesting because to me it felt like it was a lot smaller than the RFK Jr. Announcement rally that we went to a few months ago, which was also at Independence Hall, the same place in Old City. But to me, interestingly, it felt like this event felt more significant than the RFK Jr. rally. And part of the reason is that what I felt almost intuitively as people were speaking was that, it's a small gathering, but I think it's a deeper sign of change in the sense of it's like ordinary people who are coming together and gaining a sense of their own responsibility and also their democratic capacity as people, and also their ability to think independently outside of narratives that are being pushed by the ruling class, and also the need to find common ground with other people. They mentioned it's not just Muslims, it's basically any person of conscience, it's like progressives, it's Black people. They didn't really talk about, they only kind of mentioned Trump a little bit. But basically, where I think the abandoned Biden, officially the movement is that they're saying we're not afraid if Trump wins again. We're willing to accept that, even if we don't like Trump, because on one hand you have Trump, who honestly has been, he helped create part of the crisis in Israel-Palestine with Abraham Accords during his candidacy, and I think he has a lot to answer for in those terms. But basically, the fact remains that I think people are recognizing is that at the end of the day, it's Biden who's the one who's actively committing the genocide, and there has to be consequences for that, and so I think the big question that this particular abandoned Biden movement will have to face is how will they navigate the political crisis? If, for instance, if Biden is pushed out, what are you going to do in response to that? Is it just going to be about making sure Biden in particular is a one-term president, or are you going to have to make kind of a new political strategic calculus of it's not just Biden, it's the entire Democratic Party, which Biden is the representative of, and it doesn't matter who the Democrats push as a new face. But I don't know, I wasn't sure exactly how they felt about that. And also, I think there could also be differences among different people, different communities in relation to that question, because it is also a question of in a crisis, you're not actually sure what's going to happen. Trump, Biden could end up being the nominee, he could end up not being the nominee. But basically, the last thing I wanted to say, and this also goes back to Du Bois kind of, and also to the Year of Baldwin, which people will be doing the kind of recap for or reporting on. But I don't know, I just feel like something that I've been thinking about a lot these days is that this election, the 2024 election, I think how we have to approach it and think about it is that there are times in a moment of political crisis where an election is more than just an election. It stands for more than just a question of who wins and who doesn't win. And I think that, Doc has talked about this before, but if basically a large portion of the American people, from the Trump movement to this abandoned Biden campaign to all these young progressives who are trying to make sense of the whole Gaza war, if the central political task that people identify is essentially to defeat Joe Biden, to punish him for Gaza, for what he's doing in Gaza, that this is, I think the way that I think about it is that, this task of defeating Joe Biden is not just about an electoral result, but the way that I see it is that this is creating a pathway to basically a deepening of political consciousness among the American people, and also making a strategic blow against the ruling class. And that a political realignment in basically the way that Du Bois frames it in Black Reconstruction, for instance, that such a realignment often contains within it much deeper changes than just the pure fact of who votes for which party. Where in essence what happens in the Civil War and Reconstruction period is that you had masses of people who were reaching for almost a new philosophy and a new concept of themselves as agents who can basically decide the future of the country and decide the future of America. And another way of putting that is that, Doc has, I think, talked about in the past free school that essentially the American two-party system is designed to remove ideology from the equation of governance. And it's designed to kind of create the kind of mechanisms and also the appearance of stability. Like, oh, we don't have to talk about these larger ideological questions because we're kind of stable. We have like the two parties, and this is how we operate. But that what a realignment signifies is that the people themselves are dislodging that equilibrium, and that they are placing ideology squarely on the table again. And so also this is how I like partly how I understand the Year of Baldwin too, where like part of it is that this is like almost like a vehicle for the people of Philadelphia to come together and to actually try to make sense of the crisis which is engulfing the nation and what their place is in it. And in essence, again, to put ideas on the table as a question for the people to decide. And I think Baldwin in particular like is necessary for this moment because he speaks to the crisis, both the crisis of that kind of fomented the civil rights movement, but also the crisis today, where it's not just, again, it's not a crisis in electoral terms, but what Baldwin speaks to is essentially what is the psychology of people, like what happens to the psychology of people who are living through a period of enormous change, and will they have the courage to accept a newfound sense of responsibility amid that change, or will they become, like in Baldwin's words, like Lot's, like the wife of Lot, who's a character in the Bible who basically she's like fleeing from Sodom and Gomorrah, and then she turns back, and then she turns into a pillar of salt. And he's basically saying like, will the American people be like Lot's wife and kind of turn into a pillar of salt, where we're basically frozen in time, incapable of actually dealing with reality or saying anything meaningful to this moment or to the future of what's possible. And I think that this is also basically like the state of what goes for the left in this country too, where they are almost like Lot's wife, where they are unable to actually deal with the substance of change that is unfolding and the possibilities for change that are emerging, and instead basically you're kind of stuck in these essentially like these dogmatic ways of thinking and all that stuff. And I feel like we can talk about it more, but the last thing I want to say, also bringing up Reconstruction, is that part of what Du Bois pointed out with Black Reconstruction is that the tragedy of that period was that men did not fully realize the magnitude and the depth of the changes that were taking place and the possibilities that were kind of latent within those enormous changes. And I don't know, I feel like this is kind of my mindset personally, but I think it's also like a free school kind of attitude. But kind of in light of how Du Bois talks about that, I feel like it's our task to go into this year with like eyes wide open, basically, and to actually be looking and trying to make sense of what's happening and not basically like sticking our heads in the sand, like so many people, especially in the left, would like to do, or like academics, for instance. But yeah, that's kind of like a summary of what happened, and I feel like I talked a lot, but I wanted to like give like some of the context. Yeah.
Yes, Jerry and I went to the press conference, and in fact, I was very encouraged by it.
Yeah.
The very fact that the Arab and Palestinian and Muslim communities in Philadelphia came forward as they did. And it is very different from the protesters, the Philadelphia Palestinian Coalition, or even Jewish Voices for Peace. You got the sense that this was more from the community.
Yeah.
And therefore, they were taking on a task of great significance and saying enough is enough. Literally, the words of Martin Luther King, for time to break silence and not be Lot's wife, but move forward with the sense that the consequences either way are going to be very significant. But it is a realignment going on in the country. And we cannot underestimate a great political realignment. And that has more to do with the people than with the person, the candidates. And I guess a political realignment occurs when the center does not hold.
Yeah.
And I recommend to everybody William Butler Yeats's poem, The Second Coming, where he says the center has not held. Things fall apart. And that's where we are. And it is, I think, a very exciting moment. Not Doe, I'm sorry. Jerry and I were talking on the phone yesterday, and we were trying to estimate what are the chances that Biden will not run. I said the chances are 60% that he will be pushed out. But if he's pushed out, it will create such a fissure within the Democratic Party at the elite level. The elites will fracture and go into a bitter, go into a very bitter internal struggle. I think it's already occurring. The two factions at the elite level are the Clinton, Biden faction and the Obama faction. And then, of course, you have minor networks with that. But already it's a bitter struggle. Kamala Harris is the Obama person. And if Biden pulls out, will Kamala be the candidate? And most people are saying no, which is a blow to the Obama group or the Obama faction. I guess the question at the elite level, and this is what I pick up from Ezra Klein. I recommend to everybody, if you can get his podcast, it's worth listening to, not because he tells the whole story, but because he reflects elite opinions and anxieties. Ezra Klein is giving all of these possible scenarios, but he's calling for Biden to drop out. Right. And he's saying he can govern, but he can't campaign. Well, what makes you think he's governing? I mean, come on, Donald. But they have to talk like that. This is, by the way, this is the third. We're in the throes of the third great political realignment in the country in the last 100 years. The first great one was the Great Depression, the New Deal. The second one was the Black Freedom Movement, and this one. Now, this one is the most difficult because the consequences are greater. In neither of the previous ones was the question of the state and the ruling class so much at the forefront. Can they govern? I think a good part of the American population said they can't govern. Biden can claim he did all of these things, including bringing alliances together for democracy against Putin. Now, will that Putin thing work? And then tying Trump to Putin and, all of that. Then his claims about the economy, inflation is down, unemployment is down, everybody is doing good, but nobody believes they're doing good, and they don't believe him. So we're in a political realignment, and everything points to it. I don't think Biden can run. I think there are too many voices from too many sides. Of course, the Obama forces were the first ones pushing it out. When you see Axelrod and Fluff and even Klein, these are forces in one or another way connected to the to the Obama people. Axelrod in particular, I don't know him, he was the campaign manager or some high in the campaign of Obama. And he came out very early on. And all of the polls, as you pointed out, Jerry, all of the polls have Trump ahead. They say, it's within the margin of error. Yeah, come on, man. All of the polls show Biden losing. And if that's not enough, the polls show that his approval ratings are in the 30s, sometimes in the low 30s. And his disapproval is in the 50s and so on. Now, why does this matter? Does the argument against Biden, is that to say there's an embrace of Trump? Hell no. It is to recognize what the crisis is.
Mhm.
And we have never experienced anything quite like this, except in the Civil War Reconstruction period.
Mhm.
I just say, I think it would be better for the elite, the elites, the ruling class, to pull Biden sooner than later.
Mhm.
It gives them time to explain it, to think about who they put forward. I think they cannot go into the convention in August without already having a plan to consolidate around a candidate. Looks like this guy from California, Gavin Newsom. And they gotta, I don't think they can even keep Kamala on the ticket. Maybe a compromise, but I think they have to go with something like the guy from California and the woman that's the governor of Michigan. You know, for them, that's the dream team,
Mhm.
but then they can't win. Now, if they pull Biden, what about the abandoned Biden movement among the Palestinian Arabs, which has already cost him the election in Michigan? Biden can't win in Michigan. You know, he's being wounded already in Pennsylvania. Now, a lot of people think the only Muslims are Arabs. No, in Philadelphia, 40% of Black people identify themselves as Muslim, you know? And in a certain way, when we were at the presser, the people who spoke the strongest were these African American Muslim women. It was unbelievable. You know, I mean, with tears, I mean, just could not accept what was happening to these children. And that's a wound in the Black community, given our history, that's not going to be healed. And it has bittered the Black community against Biden and whoever they put forward. I don't think, and then we're all deeply angered by the performance of the Black misleadership class, the elected political class of Black people, running to Biden, running to the Zionists and shit. I mean, we just don't like it, you know. So I think Biden has to be pulled sooner rather than later is the best thing for them. But they gotta somehow. Biden is, you know, dementia, early stages of Alzheimer's. He got an attitude. He's always angry and cussing and carrying on and don't know who he is. So how do you pull a cat like this back? Maybe his wife can talk to him. My son definitely can't because he's on the pipe. You know, so how do you get the guy to listen to reason? But they have to get him out of there. But even getting him out of there, so see, Biden, I'm gonna shut up now. Biden wants to run, you know, behind the shield. I don't have to answer any questions, but I will run on my record and $2 billion of advertisement. You know, where they flood the airways, social media, and everything else with commercials for him. So that's what they want to do. And so him and his wife say, well, who can better stand for what he, quote, has achieved but him, you know? And if you pull him, well, how can a Gavin Newsom or somebody else stand for that, for what he's achieved? Well, it's a bad situation for them. But the final thing, the center has not held, the center has collapsed. And it is more than about party, as you say, it's about movements, it's about the ruling class. And do the people believe them? And of course, if they go into Chicago at the convention with Biden as the candidate, no one can even say how many tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people will turn out. This will make 1968 look like a walk through the park. The demonstrators will shut Chicago down. Hundreds of thousands will shut Chicago down. they will not be able to have a convention practically if he goes into Chicago as the candidate. So these are the stakes for them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One thing to what you said, I feel like the press conference really, like strengthened, I think, the conviction of whatever kind of basically community you come from, Americans in some ways need the authority of Black people in a certain sense of like, or it's like that the Black people, I think, bring a certain kind of moral dignity almost and moral weight to things. I don't know, just the way that like you were saying, like, because it was basically a mix of basically I think it was like two Black women, three Black women who spoke, and then like a mix of other like Arab and Palestinian men and women who spoke, and I just feel like the strength that they had.
Yeah, but you know what it is? You see, the Palestinian and Arab communities are not used to standing up.
Yeah.
The Black, I mean, it's kind of in the DNA of Black folk to stand up and to speak out. You know, it's like, the way Black folk are. But the Palestinian and Arabs, you could see they were trying not to be too, there were differences, but they're not used to this kind of standing in opposition against the elites.
Before the 2000s, before George W. Bush, most Arabs voted for Republicans because they were considered white on the census, and they were mostly small business owners. Sometimes, gas stations and those sorts of things, corner coffee shops, and so this phenomenon of quote unquote Muslims, because what does that word even mean? We just talked about they're Black, Arab. I thought you were going to say most of the Muslims in Philadelphia are like South Asian. We always get left out of the conversation.
Sorry.
Yes, sorry about that.
No, it's okay, because most people.
There's a big dude.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of, and you go to 69th Street Masjid, which is the, I think, largest masjid in Philadelphia. I guess it's a little outside of Philadelphia. It's mostly Bangladeshis, but that's all to say it's a diverse community that was not voting Democrat until the 2000s. So the idea of quote unquote Muslims, whatever that word means, American Muslims voting for Republicans is not out of the realm of possibility. In fact, actually, not too long ago, it was the norm. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. And then for speaking to Arab Muslims, in Michigan, in Chicago, there's a very heavy presence. Those are swing states. Those are states that have been affected by deindustrialization, and they have a heavy presence in the UAW, and they also came as immigrants during the 60s and 70s, and they benefited from the same way as the African American community from those industrial jobs. And Dearborn, Michigan is the highest concentration of Shia Muslims outside of Iran, so it's not like a small number. But I was listening to Trump at his most recent press conference, and he was talking about welcoming Black people back to the Republican Party. And I think there was a poll that Brianna Joy Gray has been, whatever her name is, I'll look it up later. And she was saying, so half of Black people are not going to vote for Biden. Does that make them not all Black? Because Biden had said that you're not voting for me, you're not Black. So they're voting for Trump. They're voting for RFK. They're voting for Cornel West. So yeah, it's not just Muslims, quote unquote, abandoning Biden. I feel like it's a larger trend that you have discussed actually since 2016. I remember Ruth Burchett at a Stadium Stompers meeting declared that she was no longer a Democrat. She had registered herself as a Republican because she felt like there was more room to operate in politics in Philadelphia as a registered Republican, because the Democratic machine in Philadelphia is so tight. you can't do anything without you can't do anything locally. So she felt the Republican Party, the Republican Ruth Burchett, and she felt this was a long time ago. I haven't kept up with her, but she felt like she could do more things in the Republican Party. But Trump was saying like we're welcoming Black people back to the party of Lincoln. Was that just rhetoric? Well, it's a fact.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Do you think it's possible that the Biden administration or the Democrats will drag us into potentially World War III before the election to suspend it or impose martial law?
You hold your hand. Gotta grab some.
I'm just saying this because in Ukraine we saw Avdiivka, their most fortified city, fell, and it looks like that's going to come to an end soon. Israel is becoming more emboldened in their attacks on Lebanon, and I just don't see things getting better before the election. I'm actually pretty terrified.
Go ahead.
No.
You're making us think the unthinkable. No.
Don't mean to be too grim.
No, I don't think you're being too grim at all. And you always have that in any crisis like this, where elements, the more crazy elements of the ruling class believe that a war can shift the political situation at home as well as on a world scale. And you're accurate. And the two places are in fact Western Asia, including Iran, and Eastern Europe. And we haven't mentioned Korea. This is another very important point of conflict. I mean, what do you think? I mean, because this is.
I mean, Biden did say that he did make the wartime president claim, saying that he believes the Ukraine war will make him more popular. And, I just think I kind of believe it's too late for them to change the nominee. They're way behind. And I'm just kind of like, what can they do to convince the American people that we need Biden other than a large war?
Create an international emergency.
But I think part of it is that, that Biden is wrong about the Ukraine war making him more popular. It's made him more unpopular. And I think that, the basic thing, which I don't know how much the ruling elite recognize this, but you can't use wars to secure popular support anymore amongst the American people. And I think that has to, I don't know how much they think about that explicitly, but it used to be, let's say during 9/11, the war on terror, war was used as a way to consolidate, basically after the Cold War, American support for kind of the American empire. And
this is the problem. The most unpopular president, according to polls, in 50 years. Trying to go to war. I mean, you think the American people would rally around him on the war tip? But that doesn't mean what, because it would be a coup d'etat. And it would be a reason to argue we can't have an election. I could see a worst case scenario because it's that desperate and the stakes are that high,
Yeah. And I saw NATO is doing military exercises in Poland. There's going to be 90,000 troops there this May. And that kind of coincides with the time they expect funding for Ukraine to completely tank and for things to get desperate there. So I guess we'll have to see.
Because this is partially why we do this is partially why I feel we do, we talk about people like Robert Kagan, for instance. Where like Robert Kagan.
Okay.
Yeah, where it's we're almost we're doing a sociological analysis of the ruling class. Because one thing that I feel has been a learning curve for me too is that you can't assume that they're thinking or acting rationally. And I feel that was kind of a mental thing that was I feel if they're in power, they should know exactly what they're doing, but they don't actually know exactly what they're doing. And in some ways, they are the product of the parasitism and the contradictions of like the American state and of basically like the American system, like they reflect like the decadence of the system itself. Like, I mean, Biden, I think, is the clearest example. Yeah, so. No, sorry.
I don't know the answer to this, but then I'm also thinking that while there is stuff that we can't speak to on the part of the ruling class, to what extent they'd go, there's also something that's undecided about how the people are going to move.
Right.
Should that possibility emerge? And we discussed in Free School a while back about this poll that was done where, I don't know, 60 or 70% of young people said they wouldn't go to war for America, And so there is also that question of, yes, we can imagine the worst, the ultimate worst case scenario that would emerge here. But then there's still that faith, still that hope that what we are even talking about, the abandoned Biden campaign, or just the way people have been moving in these last very contentious months, there is still a chance that the people won't let it happen.
Yeah. See, the other thing is, this is where the getting Biden off of the ticket might open the possibility of what you're saying, the war scenario. Because Biden he doesn't have the authority, or people don't trust him enough to do that. But if another person, a Gavin Newsom or somebody else, that makes it, you could see on that chessboard how they could work that. But y'all talk.
I feel like the most important thing that I've been thinking about is that the American people have rejected war.
Yes, I think that's so.
And whether it is Biden or somebody else they replace him with, I feel like that sentiment still holds true. I think that what Jeremiah said, I don't think they can use war to secure votes anymore or garner popular support. And I know that the US state is planning on sending more F-16s to Ukraine, and Putin has sort of issued a warning saying that would be bad. And Putin doesn't joke around,
I think what he's saying is that if those F-16s flew from bases or airfields in Poland or Romania, that they would be considered a part, of the war. So it would expand it. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And therefore, see, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Poland is. Poland is very belligerent. So under Article 5, an attack upon one NATO country is seen as an attack upon all. They can use that. I mean, the unthinkable. And I would say they are thinking the unthinkable.
Right.
I'm going to make another point too.
Go.
I don't think that if this hypothetical war scenario, I don't think it would be fought with American hands. I think Ukraine was a prime example. They're going to use Ukrainians or Eastern Europeans to fight the Russians. And in Taiwan, for example, they're going to send Filipinos to fight Taiwan or to fight China and Taiwan instead of Americans, because they fully recognize that, American people are not willing to serve, our empire. So, I saw they opened up like 3 or 4 new military bases in the Philippines over the past year. And that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, one thing I was also thinking about is that, like, part of what I think is so, like, hard to make sense of, but I think is also very, like, interesting in some ways, is that, like, part of what we've talked about a lot in Free School is the domestic political crisis in the United States and then the global crisis of American empire. But there's a point at which those two crises converge, right? Where part of what is unfolding with the Gaza war, for instance, is that it's literally the question of empire is encroaching onto, like, it's making itself present in the domestic political struggle. And part of what the American people have to deal with is like literally not just like, oh, like who is going to be like our president for this country, but like, yeah, like what do we do as citizens of an empire, basically? Because I think on one sense, it's reflected in the fact of like, you know, when you're basically waging all these wars abroad, then the ruling class like literally is not even beholden to the people anymore, because it is mostly invested as an imperial state, like a super state basically. And so I think that's part of what I think was highlighted during the press conference, where people were saying like, yeah, like why is it that Biden can spend like hundreds of billions of dollars in Ukraine and Israel and also waging war with China, when we have like Kensington a few blocks away in Philadelphia. Yeah, they mentioned Kensington. And I think people feel that kind of instinctively, like, okay, like the ruling class has also abandoned any semblance of needing to honor a kind of social contract with the people because of the very fact that they need to run an empire at the same time. And I think, but then the other flip side of that is, I think that's also where Baldwin comes in, where he's like, well, Americans also have to accept that they are responsible for what their country does around the world. And part of like the American people's growing up will depend on the extent to which they can accept that responsibility. And yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up because it's like partially, it's like that's how we make sense of like even the domestic political crisis. It's like also the question of empire encroaching onto like the domestic.
You know, and this fake left, I think it's becoming more exposed as fake. Yeah, you know, I'm ready to protest, but I don't see a path to real social transformation. And that's what they're saying all the time, you know, and they're not, and it's so bad. We'll talk about this when we talk about the Year of Baldwin, but it's so bad and so insulting, even, I feel insulted by it, that these people connected to the nonprofit industrial complex, and they all are. They have jobs, they pay their rent, and so on, not because they, you know, have a job so much as they work for a nonprofit. And the nonprofits are I'll say it, are one of the major instruments of the deep state. So as you can move and manipulate them, of course, you've given a lot of college graduates who wouldn't be able to work otherwise because the job situation is so bad, they can get these jobs. And so when the ruling elite says jump, they say how high. You know what I'm saying? And so that whole cadre and that whole infrastructure, which calls itself the left, and it's by design. These are not mistakes. These are the political maneuverings of a ruling elite in crisis. You lose the people, so you fund this kind of these ideological, how would you put them? Ideological, political kind of nodes, NODES, that come off as young and anti-establishment and Black Lives Matter and queer. We're everything. You know what I'm saying? You're everything it appears to be. But it's that conveyor belt from elite universities to the nonprofits. Very articulate people. But they call themselves the left, and the people, the masses, are locked out. So they can call demonstrations and protest, but they have no vision how we move forward. And then, of course, they lock themselves in to this Democratic Party thing because of the claim that Trump is a fascist, and we have to prevent fascism. They all across the board hold that position. And no political analysis, no political realism, And the big thing, no connection to the anti-war sentiment of the American people. Well, how could the American people have anti-war feelings? Because aren't they all racist? You know? And that attack, I mean, it was uniform, but now they face this crisis. They face this crisis. And it was handed to them on a silver platter by Joe Biden and Netanyahu.
Yeah.
You know, so now the president who was supposed to fight for democracy against fascism is funding fascists that are carrying out a genocide
In 2 places.
in 2 places. So now what do you say? You locked in. You locked in. Your whole political strategy, your whole political worldview is a fraud and a lie. And I would argue intentionally so. There's too much, at least in this city, to convince me of that. You know, setting up a Du Bois reading and education thing when you got the Saturday Free School, been doing this for over 10 years. You know, why are you going to reinvent the wheel? Or are you reinventing the wheel? Or are you really attempting to discredit the real movement around Du Bois? And of course, Baldwin.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They don't want Baldwin. Well, they show up, but, you know, boycott the free school. And that's a beautiful thing because it's better that they're not around us. Because their point is to disrupt. But I think this is very important. And I think it has had, I think Black young people are under ideological and political attack from many angles of distraction, but then all of these nonprofit organizations which claim to speak in the name of young Black people. This is horrible. This is really horrible, and it's a political crime in my mind. What is being done, especially to young college students and college graduates among Black people. They're being completely miseducated, completely used. And I just, and I think we're going to have to, as we get into the year of Baldwin and the reading, I got some thoughts on that. We're going to have to speak to this situation. We're going to have to address it. What the ruling elite and their, I say their agencies are doing to the potential of Black young people.
Okay, we can pass it over to Serafina, Alice, and Shantanu, who are going to start with assessing the inauguration of the Year of Baldwin.
Yeah, that was a very helpful analysis in even understanding what is the task of free school in this moment of deep crisis. And I've been trying to wrap my mind around the event, the year, and it really gets to the purpose of free school. And I think, especially in this moment, how in this moment where the center cannot hold of these institutions of the ruling elite, I think our foremost question is, where are the people at? What are they capable of, and what can they do? Because it's true that the ruling elite, the social contract between the ruling elite and the people are broken. But I think there is a belief in the free school that the people can change the tide of what happens in this country. And that, with that premise, I was trying to understand, like, how do you even assess the Year of Baldwin? How do you even assess an event, the launch specifically that happened last week? And I was trying to, because I think time moves funny around events, where you put so much into it and then it happens, and then afterwards,
Don't know.
you're not quite sure where to begin. Like, was it a success? Was it a failure? How do you know? And I started by going back trying to think back to where we began before, or not began, but where we were before the event. What were our assumptions and questions that we had about people? Meaning, like, one was that we believe that people don't truly know Baldwin, that he's not being taught. And if he is being taught, he's not being taught in the revolutionary manner the person was. And also that there hasn't been a connection made yet, or it's being hidden, that Baldwin is relevant to the future. And for us to understand what's happening right now and what the future we can march towards looks like. But those were some of the questions I think we had, which is, do people know Baldwin? And if they do, what are they thinking about Baldwin? Then it was, okay, what did we accomplish? What was our position going to the people of, here's what we believe, and let's have a discussion about it. And I think it was incredibly significant that we did frame Baldwin as a revolutionary. James Arthur Baldwin, God's revolutionary voice. And people came for that. There was, it wasn't what we, I think we had gotten responses of, 300 people, and some of us were nervous, and some of us were like, oh, are these people going to show up? And it wasn't 300 people, but people did show up. I think it was about 100 to 150. It was a mix of younger students, and then also people from the community, African Americans, white, I guess, I don't know if leftists are a category, but it wasn't as apparent as in some of our previous events. And so we framed Baldwin as a revolutionary. Then we also dedicated the year to the immortal children of Gaza. And that was a bold statement, especially being at an institution such as the Free Library of Philadelphia, where it being as part of one of the large institutions of the city, connected to money, connected to government, it wasn't clear that we could pull something like dedicated to the immortal children of Gaza off at such an institution. But I think there was a part of law or what Du Bois has described and what Jeremiah has also referenced lately as law and chance. There's a law that this sort of event should not have happened at the Free Library, but there was the chance that there are young people, and especially the two young women that we had met the preschool, or the two young women that we had met and Emily and Serafina had built a relationship with, where something was telling them that maybe this isn't it was held off long enough that they didn't know that this was something that should not have happened. But there was a part of them that's young and part of this crisis and wants to do something, and maybe Serafina can speak to if this is true, is that they also knew that something like this was valuable and should happen. And so, and then I think the other pieces, or putting forward these propositions, we also made the claim that in this moment of crisis, we the people can do something. We the people can decide the future. Because I think there's a lot of, and it was clear through some of the questions that people were asking, and also the silent response, or not silent, but the responses and reactions we saw in people's faces, that they agreed that we're in a moment of crisis. Things are not right. But the extra step is, do they believe that something can be done about it? Do they believe that they can be part of what can be done about it? And so I think those two pieces of, what were the questions that we had? What did we place forward in the event? Helped me to understand how to assess the event better too. And then there's the last piece, which is where do we go from here based on what we saw, we heard. And it's interesting because I was rewatching the documentary that was put together. And there's this scene that Baldwin is talking to, I think, a younger person, and he's like, actually, before you, the reader of, my writings or get to see and process and feel the hurt and the struggle of my novels, my essays, I'm the one that has to feel it first because I'm writing it. And it's like not Giovanni's room,
Go Tell
Go
It.
Tell It on the Mountain, where he had taken 10 years to write that novel because he had to work through all of the characters and their emotions and the situations that they were dealing with in their lives. Whether it was his father who came from the South and believed what Baldwin says, believed the things that the white man had said about Black people. He had to work out first. And I think that helped, like watching that documentary again, one, that was an accomplishment. And I think we'll see, it won't be quick, but I think that will have made an impact on people's lives. But the other part is, I was like, oh, I understand why some of us are so exhausted, because we put so much of ourselves and our honesty and vulnerability and our hopes too. Like, I think hope is a very vulnerable thing because like Baldwin said, actually it's fashionable to be pessimistic. It's fashionable to be doom and gloom about the world. I think because we are trying to be, to put forward a vision and have hope about the future, it is a vulnerable place where we had to love and hurt first before we can even bring it to others. And in terms of, or even just talking about that, it did show that we're not done. Like that single launch was really just a launch. I think people didn't fully get to work out the discussions and questions that they had. I think one, for example, this upcoming election, that was a question from the audience, like, okay, now that I've heard about Baldwin, what does that mean between Biden and Trump? Like, how do you assess that question? Then there's the question of, okay, yes, I agree, but young people, they're distracted. There's a lot of pessimism. What do you do then? And then there's also all of the discourse, I think, that people have that just go to show how much people are isolated and don't have a chance to work out the questions or thoughts or strivings. And so I guess I say that all to say that it was a beginning and just shows how much that there is to work through the year, work through as the world situation is evolving so rapidly and quickly. And I think for free school too, it's a quick growing up as well, because now we actually have to work through and talk to and discuss and negotiate with people, and people are, as Baldwin shows in his novels, his essays, they're complex. You might not always understand them immediately. They might not even understand themselves immediately when they're talking to you.
Definitely.
But I think as I've been reflecting, it's given me a lot of clarity and also questions clarity in that we're exactly where we need to be and where we need to go, where we have these different reading groups or reading sites throughout the year. The churches, bookstores, churches where, there's the question of what is the church? What is its function? Because it's not what it used to be during the civil rights movement or the Black freedom struggle. But is there a kernel that's still there? There's the bookstores that are oftentimes run with the leftists or leftists that also span a huge range of people and questions that they have. But what is to be made of these oftentimes young people too, who are searching for clarity, ideological clarity about the times that they're living in and what they are to do about it. We have, I think I'm forgetting, so churches, bookstores, a mosque with the Nation of Islam, having Michael Muhammad at the event was also a big achievement too. High schools where a lot of young people are in their formative years too, and set the trajectory for the rest of their lives. There's the question of, are they thinking at all? Or are they just on their phones all the time? And there's nothing that can be do about young people. But I think, for us being there, it is the belief that young people are thinking. And if anything, they're in a lot of pain because they don't know how to make sense of what they're thinking about. And that they can also be part of this new America that's being formed, that actually they have a lot to add. Their thoughts are valuable. And so all these different sites will be in the political, the ideological, and the moral life world of the people of Philadelphia, and also the different sites that I think in New Mexico, India, but really centrally Philadelphia. Like, where are people, and what are they thinking, and what is capable in this new year? Because yes, there's a worst case scenario, but the question is also, what can we do in this time? Like what? And I think the worst case scenario is also in a very short period of time, but I think time has been very interesting in this period. But I think the worst case scenario is only also rest on the assumption that actually the country is to change after November too. Because they sense that if within this time they don't do something crazy, Trump and the people will actually demand otherwise. They're going crazy because Trump was like, we're pulling out NATO if I'm president. Right. And that's a huge, that's a change for the country where yes, there are troops that are not American fighting, but the money, the resources, investments are all coming from here. Because Europe's trying to figure out, can NATO continue to exist without the US? And I also I think one unrelated note is that I went to the movie theaters and they were putting an ad for recruitment into the military. And in my entire life, I've never seen that happen. And maybe that's just like a limited sample pool, but the fact that there was that ad showed me something about there's a lack within the state of people who are willing to fight or continue to fight for America. So I'll stop there. And then
I think like as a matter of success or not, it's an interesting thing because what you're saying is true, that we are beginning, like Doc had spoken before, like in our last free school, beginning a new year, like which also considers what you were mentioning earlier, that the city has changed since we've held and breathed Du Bois. Like it's changed,
right,
you know? What that means
right.
to me is that, or what that signifies is a certain quality that is alive in a sense in Philly, or because of.
Yeah.
And what I want to say is that I know that everyone in free school, and I'm really just speaking for myself, are working as vessels.
Yes.
Like we're vessels for, in this case, God's revolutionary voice, Baldwin. Because what I'm thinking about is what makes a revolutionary. What do we mean? And I'm only breaking it down to that point because obviously there's a lot to reflect upon. the quality of the people who attended the event, meaning, are they hurt? What is their mental and emotional location, spiritual place, like where are they? Who are they? And then where were we also when we were interacting and organizing or trying to prepare words to say? Like, what are we thinking? And for what, you know? And whether that be towards the documentary, what the documentary pulled out of the audience, or to the quality that the performers, whether that be with Romnia or Alfie, like the certain, you know, like we were saying with Derek, like the certain tone that kept repeating itself was also like the fact that we stand on all the time here, which is we go back to move forward. Like we think about things that are lied upon, whether that be Du Bois, Baldwin, the Third American Revolution, King, like to be able to understand better, whether that be ourselves, this time, like you're saying, like this thing about time, like, you know, and how, in essence, that this is really very well the only possibility, like you're saying, Alice, to do anything.
Could you explain, this is the only possible?
Like one of the only possibilities,
Well,
and I mean specifically towards the Year of Baldwin or
Mhm.
the endeavors to change externally and internally. Because what you're saying about the left, Doc, makes me come to that question. They weren't present.
Right, right.
And that tells something.
Oh, definitely.
And it's also to the fact that I know that what we're doing is something they would not expect.
Yes, yes, I was
You know?
thinking that, yeah.
Meaning you're out here, like you're saying, Doc, trying to attack Du Bois, but we have also moved with Du Bois to another spot.
Yes,
entirely.
yes, yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
So how can you attack that? So what that also means is that we are going somewhere, which is somewhere that people need to go to. We are moving in an unexpected way, or it cannot be, you know, thought about prior to. Meaning, like, going back to the documentary screening, I know that the way that people responded to the documentaries in different positions, like in different moments of the documentary, also signified to the nature of the audience, and the intellectual, you know, what is observed and what is not observed. Why are things important? And, you know, that really gets back into this whole question that we brought up in the podcast, which was the next day, which was also something to reflect upon.
Right.
Like you had mentioned, Doc, why put God and revolutionary together? And in what way is that actually possible? And so that also means that though we come from a large body of social, scientific, philosophical, and ideological endeavors, whether that be from the European to, you know what I'm saying, like the real civilizational thing, but we are acknowledging something that also occurred in America, which also gives something so much to this moment of crisis in time. Like when you say crisis, we are also talking about the amount of hurt that people have,
Right.
the emotional weight that people bear, and you know how we can address that quality. The only way to really also do that, or one of the ways maybe I would suggest that we have been doing that, is if we understand exactly who the American is. And how do you do that without Baldwin? How do you do that without King? And it gets down to that because we're accepting a certain, role or responsibility. This is coming from me thinking about last night's conversation with the podcast team because we're thinking about episode 2. And how we've considered this thing about the child and youth as a social category. And we see that there is a future because we know that what has created all of us also creates a certain future. That's what Baldwin was also saying. Think about the child. Know that there is one thing that holds us all together, which is love. And I only say that because I literally just was sitting here and this morning reading or finishing If Bill Street Could Talk. And that also considered many things about time and love specifically. And I'm only bringing this up because the arc of the story belonged to the birth of the baby that was created out of the love between 2 people who were from Atlanta. And one was put into jail because he was lined up he was arrested and lined up against other people, not exactly Black, Puerto Rican, and other light-skinned people. And the woman pointed out and said that, yes, Fonnie is the rapist when he was not. And so he's in jail while and the person that he made this baby with were friends since they were children. But this person, Tish, is not in jail, but has to also bring the baby to, in a sense, the baby has to be brought out. The baby has to be born. And the realization that Fonnie also comes to is the fact that, he is told to be put under hell, like to the ground, below it, to not belong, to not even be acknowledged as a human being. And that is also something that maybe he hadn't had to face before. But because he was pushed to a certain place, where not only had the accused, the woman who accused Fonnie of being a rapist, fled back to Puerto Rico and had a miscarriage and is also going into another mental place, which also makes the case against Fonnie worse. Fonnie realizes that he will come out because the baby is coming out. Like a part of him that created the baby. And what I'm saying specifically is that there's a lot of ways that people despair. Either you can give up on what had either made, for example, Fonnie, because Fonnie comes from a family, and then Tish also comes from a specific family. And Fonnie's dad was somebody who very much resembled Fonnie, loved Fonnie, right? But Fonnie's mother was a born again, kind of Christian who wanted to keep herself right. And then Fonnie had 2 sisters, right? So the fact is that Fonnie's father committed a certain type of suicide at the end of the book, because he realizes that the case against Fonnie could be so bad that Fonnie could be in jail for life. But the fact is that, it could be said that it's a sad thing that Fonnie's father could not see the child that would be born that same day. But something is also true, that Fonnie's father loved Fonnie so much that Fonnie's father wanted to meet Fonnie where he was, or like wanted to try and be there for Fonnie. But what Fonnie accepted at a similar time or almost simultaneously is that really is this quality that happens when you know that you're being put to a certain place, but you also know that you're not that. And what I mean is that basically love made it possible for those who were able to accept, meaning, and the language sounds harsh, but I don't mean the language to be harsh, that like life, and what I mean by life is that I know that all of us in this room faces also this fact. Life also comes at you with a certain level of like, this is where you are, and at that point alone, what becomes accepted really, and is only possible to be accepted, is if you have a certain faith towards that, like you had mentioned, Alice, the timing, or the trust in the truth, which is what we mean by God, or what we mean by revolutionary, or whatever. And I think what I mean is that I know in my particular core, there is that Seraphina or whatever that will move towards what is true.
Right.
And because that is the case, I also know that others can as well. And what I think pulled out in the event, and what I feel like I'm better understanding, Alice, because what you said, that there is this qualitative change that had happened, or maybe already happened, and then we have to go through it, is the fact that one, we are on the right side of history, in one way to put it. That's one way to put it. And because of that, we're now moving towards what we can, or what we want to be true. Talking directly about Baldwin, saying specifically what free school is and what we're doing and how we can do it, and actually being heard. And I think that those, in a sense, even if we had gone through some kind of fires to get to this place, allows us more capable of coming even stronger for King, or even in every episode of the podcast.
Bless you. I was also reflecting on the quality of the event, and I kept thinking about, I'm thinking of this word quality because there is a very separate quality, or a unique and sometimes unnameable quality about the work that free school does. And I also wanted to say, I just wanted to underscore what we had also been saying about the fake left in Philadelphia, because even the fact that the abolition school uses W.E. Du Bois as their symbol, or as their apparent supposed ideological anchor, it just says so much. It's very obvious to me that they got that from free school, but it also says so much that they're bootlegging a playbook that we set into motion 10 years ago and then really celebrated 6 years ago. And even then they can't catch up, right? Because they're not actually working from the soil of the Black freedom movement the way that we are. This conversation is making me think about a lot, but I guess back to this thing of the quality of the event. The event felt like a world within a world, and I was thinking about why it's possible for a free school event to have that quality, and I think it's because we actually have the clarity and the courage to drive to the questions that are underneath the American and the world crisis, and in that confrontation to also release or clarify or illuminate a certain possibility or articulate a certain answer. And it's like what Baldwin said, right? To reveal the beloved to himself, and with that realization to make freedom real. I saw that quality in the event, where it was also so interesting to me because I felt like we were peering into the future. We were peering into the crisis, but also from the vantage point of that valley. We also saw we could see the light, we could see the future. And then now I'm thinking about the literacy campaign and how we deliberately chose to title it "The People of Philadelphia Reads James Baldwin." It's also that qualitatively Philadelphia is a special city, and I think that was also reflected in the event, where we could see the makings, we actually saw the makings of the new American people, because sociologically I felt that many frontiers of the American people were covered in that event. And the remarkable thing, and this is the work of free school, is that we can synthesize all of it, because every single American person has a role in the new American people to become responsible to the fate of this nation. Yeah. There's also something I was thinking about from the Can't Turn Back, but my mind went in a lot of places. Do you remember,
What you were thinking?
Yeah, because we had just read it in Lotus. I'm trying to, come on, help me out. Yeah, huh?
The essay can't turn back.
Yeah,
Maybe you're thinking about the freedom thing, right? Like the forces of the world cannot really stop anyone or any people who want to be free.
yeah, no, my mind will come back to it. It's, yeah. Well, I guess part of also what I wanted to say is like a new democratic consciousness and the literacy campaign nurturing that, or like really nurturing this new accelerating this new democratic consciousness, because like back to the remarks that you were giving at the beginning, Jeremiah, like my mind landed on what you said about like Baldwin's biblical metaphor of the pillar of salt, and like, you know, basically essentially becoming frozen in time, or even being locked out of historical process that's already being set into motion. Like, I see the work of the literacy campaign as restoring or integrating a certain urgency back into the American people that like already belongs to them. And I think that's also what that event showed. Yeah, I have more to say, but like my head just went in so many directions that's kind of all I can say right now.
Can I add to that before we talk about the podcast a little? So, yeah, I think connected to the opening remarks that Jeremiah did, but also what Alice and Sabrina you were saying, I was reminded of, because we were watching this clip of Baldwin speaking to, I forget where, but high school students, called, the thing is titled The Fire This Time. And I'm thinking of a very specific part of it where he says that I've always been bothered by the way American history is taught in schools, because when you see what they teach, or when I see what they teach, I'm just left with the idea that you think this was accomplished without me, you know. And the reason I bring that up is I think this became like very clear, like very concrete to me, only for the first time when we went to see Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at Independence Hall in his rally, that, you know, the strides that were made by the Black freedom struggle, by the civil rights movement, never really became a part of the life world or the political consciousness of this country in the way that it deserved to, in the way that could move things, that could be the wellspring of ideas from which that transformation that Baldwin is talking about happens. And even now, the fact that Black people are thought about in the whole, like the electoral process, the political process, just as voters, you know, I struggle to understand how that can be possible when you've had a Du Bois, when you've had a Baldwin, when you've had a King, you know, and how is it possible? You know, it's almost like saying, well, because I'm always thinking about India, right? It's almost like saying that, and to some extent this is happening in India also, where you do not understand that you come from Gandhi, every person, you know. How can it be that when you're talking about elections in this country and talking about this historic period, you can only think of Black people in the terms of how they're going to vote, you know? How does King not live in the life world of this country's consciousness? And that's what I was reminded of when Baldwin was saying this thing of, how do you think this history was accomplished without me? And in some ways, I feel like the Year of Baldwin and the literacy campaigns, like the literacy campaign and the reading groups, like Michelle was touching upon, I really feel like
That is one of the tasks that we've set
Yes.
ourselves also, to say that these ideas are what is going to take us forward.
Mm.
This is what we're going to draw upon, and this has to live. This has to have a life in people's, inner worlds and outer worlds. You got
Okay, yeah. No, you helped me remember what I wanted to say, which is connected. But there's an interesting passage, and They Can Turn Back toward the end, where Baldwin probes why the genesis of the movement was among the students in the South. And he said what makes these students remarkable is they possess a moral authority that comes from being so close to their history. Like children of Reconstruction, children whose grandparents were slaves, like they know, right? Like they know what drives the historical process of this country and how then it can be transformed or bent. And I think what I'm saying is like connected to what you're saying because, well, I think what you said proves that there's been a disruption, right? But I think what I'm also saying is, how is it that I could have inherited Baldwin so seamlessly almost, as if it's in me, right? And I think in a way, I'm also saying, like, anyone who wants a relationship to the American future at this moment, their history is Baldwin, their history is Du Bois, and that is their moral authority if they can claim it up and take it for their lives.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what I'm so moved by or so intrigued by, is that Baldwin has this quality of like, here he belongs to us in a way. And I think that's what, at least what we've seen with some of the students proves, like in a sense, because as much as that history the ruling class has attempted to break it, or to dissolve it. Like, obviously, it's not completely possible, right? Qualitatively, I mean, that's also the title of Baldwin's essay. They can't turn back. What does that mean? Like, crystallization, right? The crystallization of the democratic process. Things change. Yeah.
Could you say that one more time? You said the crystallization of the democratic process, and then you say things change. Something seems like there's something missing.
Well, maybe I should say things are not the same, and we have to pick up where things have been left off, and that is the point at which we pick up, and it's also there in us, right? Like it's in the life world of Philadelphia. It's already touched us in some way, like whether we're conscious of it or not. But that articulation, like, or the study of that quality or that process is actually what frees you, because then you can develop it.
Well, I've just been taking all of this in, and this last Saturday we had the inauguration for the Year of James Baldwin, and a lot of things have already been said. So I can try to be a little personal and say that when I looked around that room, I saw a lot of people who were searching, who had come there to find something. And I feel like when you are a young person and you do not have an idea or the faith in the social contract between you and your country has been broken or is invisible to you, you feel kind of lost. And that is why you go and you try to search and you protest in search of something. And I saw a lot of those people there that day with us in that room. I saw a 17-year-old boy who's in high school come up to me and say, I would like to show this documentary to my class. It touched him in some way. The documentary really touched me, to see Baldwin, to hear him, and to see our dedication really shine through to the immortal children of Gaza. The inauguration, again, I can't really speak to its success because it's just the beginning of something, as people have said. I feel like the documentary, the discussion, as well as all the performances were just a door to an entire year. And most of what we're trying to accomplish is still to follow. I think one of the most important things that we're trying to achieve this year is the literacy campaign. And I feel like the podcast is a part of that literacy campaign. I see it as a part of it, as a way to reach more people. And we had the first episode of the podcast this past Sunday, and we titled it Witness and Prophecy. And it was a culmination of the podcast episode was a culmination of a lot of people, their efforts, their collective thoughts. But mostly it was Baldwin holding us all together. And I wanted to speak just briefly about why we titled this first episode Witness and Prophecy. I think while planning for this, a lot of our free school conversations were a touchstone. And we believe that Baldwin was a witness for the people during a revolutionary time. He was born in 1924. He was a witness for the Great Depression. It was the first political realignment of the last century. I believe in some way the World War II and its aftermath was also a significant political realignment, and he was a witness for that time. He was a witness for Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement. And through him, we can understand that time is real, Time is a social reality. And through all of this time, he was there turning the pages of history and writing down the revolutionary nature of the time. On these pages of history, he recorded the nature of each of these moments in history in which the Black struggle formed a significant part of American life. The ideas that we live by today are a result of the struggle of Black people. And prophetically, in a way, he also foreshadowed the crisis that we are in today. But not only that, through his words, through his essays and novels and poems, he was an optimist through it all, and his words held a promise of a better future. And the way that he does that is by telling us to love each other. And he says that the future of America is exactly as bright as the future of the Negro, because I think that the conception of love in this country starts with Black people. This podcast was, of course, a part of this literacy campaign where we're trying to bring out Baldwin as a revolutionary, as a person who teaches us that we have to love each other because at the end of the day, all we have is each other. And during the first episode of the podcast, it was nothing like that we had imagined. I think that we can plan all we want, but once we get down to discussing Baldwin, it just takes you somewhere that you never thought you'd go. I think that very briefly we discussed why we titled this episode, why we titled this entire podcast God's Revolutionary Voice, how God is an allegory for truth, and truth and revolution go hand in hand. And that revolution has to come from a deep love of the people. I think that one of the things that I took personally away from the podcast is how we talked about a revolutionary can only be born if he loves the people, not the other way around, where you become a revolutionary and then you think about loving the people. I feel like we established that Baldwin is a revolutionary thinker, and he's on par or even greater than the European thinkers of Enlightenment, and because he saw things that they did not. We established that during this political period of realignment, we have to bring him in and read him and understand him, because he has a lot to offer for our time. Because Baldwin spoke from the perspective of darker humanity, and he saw the light through this perspective. He saw the path to freedom, which was unexpected. Really, he saw the path to freedom, the path to what Michelle was talking about, a new sense of democracy from the perspective of darker humanity. And we had about 300 people who viewed this over the last week on Twitter. We had over 400 views on YouTube, and we hope that the next episode, where we talk about the youth and their responsibility to this moment, is also as deep a conversation as the one we had last week.
I wanted to add and also respond to what Corbo was saying, because I grew up in America, that when I was learning about the civil rights movement as a kid, the teachers did a skit of Rosa Parks, and in the skit, it was a spontaneous thing that Rosa Parks had spontaneously decided that she was too tired to move and that she wasn't going to give up her seat. So the idea is the whole bus boycott is a spontaneous thing that just comes out of nowhere. And this is how many people are taught. This is how I was taught civil rights movement as a kid. How many American kids are taught, even though this was on Martin Luther King Day. And it takes away from young people that they have agency. And this whole thing with a podcast, which I think that it's a new media, and with the documentary, it's a new media to reach people. But also, it didn't take me. I was a kid. I was very young in elementary school, and it didn't take me until I came to Temple when I found out that Rosa Parks had been to a freedom school, and that they trained to do nonviolence, and that nonviolence wasn't just a thing where, oh, I'm nonviolent, I don't do anything, so why are you beating me up? But no, that you're a disciplined, nonviolent actor, wielding this the sword that heals, so to say. And how do you do that? Because you don't just pick up a sword and know how to use it. All these things that I'm listening to people say, I'm thinking about how all the people in free school now have the tools And also, they can't, what Michelle was talking about, they can't turn back. All the people in the preschool are being given the tools to spread this pedagogy around in high schools, in churches, in mosques, because it does belong to everybody. But most importantly, it belongs to the kids that Baldwin was talking about, and they can't turn back. And you're telling them that they do have agency to change their situation, to change their country. I was gonna say something about, about, being closer to your history and they can't turn back and being closer to the South. I was listening to an NPR article about a Black woman who grew up in Russia. And so they're just talking about an NPR level discussion of race. And
Was that Lily Golden?
this is a while ago, I don't think so. Was it?
Lily Golden. She was raised, her father went to the Soviet
Russia.
Union to help build their, and she was raised there.
Maybe,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna write that down to look it up. Maybe, but what she was saying was her fiance, her soon-to-be fiance took her to a restaurant, and he was gonna propose to her, and she just wanted to get proposed to, and the restaurant wasn't letting them sit at a nice table, even though he had reservations. And her soon-to-be fiance put his foot down and said, "No, I've reserved the table. I want that table." And she said, "Why are you making such a big fuss? Like, let's just sit down. Just let's have dinner." And he said, "No, like my father fought for this,
Yeah.
and I'm not gonna." And then he realized, you don't understand because you grew up in Russia,
Yes.
even though you're Black.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And he said, "I can't do this marriage." And it's just, being connected to your history, knowing that you can change the world, and that I can't be around people who don't want to change the world.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just wanted to add to what people were saying. I feel like the feeling I had after the inauguration was like, oh damn, this year is gonna be a lot. And I think that I feel like to the extent that I think Serafina also was saying that Baldwin, especially watching the documentary that Emily put together, to the extent that Baldwin draws something out of people, I think also this year will draw something out of us. And it will ask of us certain things that maybe we haven't had to deal with before. And to that extent, I have it's like a mix of excitement and determination and a little bit of trepidation, I guess, mixed together. Because part of it, I think, is that a concept that we talk about a lot in the free school is this idea of the new American people. And it's basically become part of our language and how we understand the world. And I think that while the composition of the event and the people who came was reflective of the new American people, it's not like people automatically recognize it, It's not like someone will automatically just be like, oh yeah, I am the new American people. Maybe I can say that, I don't know. But I think the feeling I had was that okay, we're gonna have to this is what struggle is. We're gonna have to struggle for this idea, because there's also no way that a new American people can be born without struggle. It's not a thing that just happens painlessly or easily or automatically. And I think part of what our task is with the literacy campaign and the reading groups and all that is actually getting down to the concreteness of it with people, and literally just working all of these questions out. Because I think, even in the panel discussion, people have different ideas about where the American people are, and that's part of what the ideological struggle can be also a very large and maybe intimidating word, but I think that is literally what ideological struggle is in substance. And I think, so I don't know, that was a feeling that I had, okay, this is where the struggle is. It's not just that we are proclaiming the new American people, but it's we are struggling for the birth of the new American people. And that is something that can also only happen if like it's not just us, but like we're able to involve people in that actual dialogue to basically create ourselves anew. And I think I was also thinking about like, I feel like whenever we have events, especially events where like people who maybe aren't familiar with the free school come, like I think, people obviously ask questions. They're like, who are these people? Like, who are these people who are like, maybe someone who you wouldn't naturally expect to be like hosting an event about James Baldwin. Like, why are they doing this? Like, who are they? Because it's like there's one thing on like a very superficial level of like the demographics of free school, which I think people can sometimes be taken aback by.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, I think all of us are very unusual people, to be honest. Like, we're very unusual people in terms of our life journeys, how we got here, why we're here, like why we're why we've committed ourselves to this. And I think that, and I really take, I think, I learn a lot from how each person carries themselves in like events, but also, like all the stuff that we do in free school, because I think the only way that, or I guess another way of putting it is that like, interestingly, it's almost like because we're so unusual, that's part of what sparks the conversation in the first place.
Yeah.
Because then we like, it's also incumbent on us to be like, to not try to hide who we are. And that's something that I was talking about with like we were processing in like the Bandung group too. But like, yeah, in this year of Baldwin, there's nowhere to hide. Like for each of us individually too, but also like as free school, like there's nowhere for us to hide. And I think that part of what that means is like each of us is going to have to find a place within ourselves where actually like we want to literally share our lives with people. And I think that Emily was doing that with, the introduction that she gave at the very beginning, talking about how she saw herself. I like just read the Sunny's Blues short story last night.
You just read?
Oh, Sunny's Blues, the short story that Emily referenced. And like how she saw herself in that, but also what it was like to be raised like in a Chinese family and all the things that the immigrant mentality kind of is trying to push you towards and all that stuff. And then, because even for me too, it's like, it's like Baldwin is part of the reason, like why I'm here, like why I'm doing any of this stuff. Because I think he like basically confronted me with this basic thing of like, can you live with yourself if you don't even try to do something?
Right.
Like what, like is it possible to even, like, is that even living? Because, like, I think many young people too, like, because we're also depressed and because also like traumatic shit happens in our lives, it's like people are not actually sure if they want to live. I wasn't sure if I wanted to live, and I feel like, I guess I'm just bringing that up because like each of us, I think, has to find that place where like also we come to terms with who we are and come to terms of accepting like why we're doing what we're doing, because I think that is also the basis on which an actual dialogue can be had and people can actually know each other. And we have to be the first in some ways, like whether it's in the reading groups or in like the events or whatever, like we have to be the first to be like, yeah, like this is who I am.
Right.
Like, it's nice to meet you. Like, this is who I am. Like, you have to deal with me as that, and not in like a confrontational way, but just in an honest way. And yeah, I think I had more stuff to say, but that's kind of what I've been thinking about, like after the inauguration, because I feel like, like again, it's like first that Baldwin draw something out of each of us and out of the people who came to the event, like especially with the documentary, and then I think also like with the Q&A and then just how people were responding, but also Baldwin. Interesting. It's like it's really like he like kind of gets inside of you too.
Yes.
Like it's like Baldwin's voice kind of gets inside you, and then it becomes part of how you like process your life and your world and reality. And the last thing I want to say was that I think we have all these like we have a very good and concrete and I think ambitious goal with what Michelle brought up of like, okay, we want to be part of creating a new democratic consciousness amongst the people of Philadelphia and wherever Baldwin ends up with the reading groups across the country. But that also, like, there's a very personal side to it, which I think is very distinct with Baldwin, where Baldwin gives you a way to relate to pain. and I think that was partially what I was thinking about with like Serafina talking about the Beale Street could talk, because I feel like it's like, yeah, people are like Americans are really hurt, and they're hurt in ways that I think they don't even understand. And and I just feel like Baldwin is like, out of like, if we have like this kind of triad of like Du Bois, Baldwin, King, I feel like Baldwin is the person who allows you to enter into a dialogue with your life and with the pain that you've experienced, and to not be controlled by it, but to actually have a fruitful relationship to it. And I think I think was something that I struggled with a lot when, like, a few years ago, was like, I feel like if you don't have a way of actually having an honest relationship with the pain that you've experienced in your life, then you quickly become very narcissistic, because then you're like, oh, like, this is just like nothing, like this has never happened to someone else before, like this is just my problem. And you become almost, Baldwin things, like, then you read, but like the real thing is like, yeah, like I think because people are so isolated, like they have no real way of actually working through the actual difficult things that all people are going to have to work through in order for us to actually become a new people. And I think that part of what I think will be very interesting about, like the reading groups and the literacy campaign is like, like can people enter into an actual dialogue with themselves and with the pain that they hold in their lives, which is also a way of entering into dialogue with like community, and then entering into dialogue with like people, because then you become, in some sense, free to actually not be so, in some ways, like narcissistic about yourself, or just isolated. But like actually you're given the tools to like even want to enter into a relationship with another person, and with more people. That's a lot more honest, I guess, because I feel like that's part of the, like, if there are conditions for the new American people to emerge, one of it has to be, can Americans even be honest with each other?
Right.
Like, can we be honest with each other? And that's part of what I think Baldwin confronts. And what I think sometimes I get surprised, even like rereading some of his older essays that like I'd read before, but it's like, oh shit, like Baldwin's dealing with like everything that Americans deal with. He doesn't hold back at all. Like he deals with like our sexuality, like all the shit that Americans kind of go through but never actually acknowledge in their lives. But he actually goes right to that place, and it's like, okay, like Americans actually have to like be honest about themselves and be honest with each other, because there's no way for this country to actually survive if people don't actually have some degree of like some honest relationship with each other. This is also an honest relationship with yourself. That's kind of like thoughts I've been having.
For myself, the inauguration was a very emotional event, and I thought it was a very successful event. I know, we had the RSVPs of up to 200, 300 people, and I think 150 ultimately came, which is no small matter. And some of the feedback that I've received from people that I know that you all don't know, who a couple of them have never responded to anything the Free School did. One woman in particular, whose name I won't mention, was quite impressed, and everybody wants a copy of the documentary. So thank you, Emily, for your tremendous work. But now we're on the threshold of the second stage of this, which might be the most complicated stage. But if anybody can do it is the Free School. As to our demographics, as you put it, Jerry, that is to say, the large number of Asians in the Free School. What does that say about the Free School? But more, what does it say about Baldwin? And I think the fact that Baldwin has this universal presence in the lives of people who discover him. And I don't always understand, and I'm always trying to understand, as you said, the demographics of the Free School. But I think the Free School, as we are constituted, is organic and natural for this time, especially when one puts principle ahead of performance. And the free school is a collection of highly principled people committed to an American revolutionary struggle. And we're going to have to go to the people now, rather than the people coming to us. We will raise questions that are on the minds of people, but issues that they don't have places to discuss them, especially issues of love and the Baldwinian concept of love. And we're going to have to define that: love, revolution, democracy, and war. For the next 12 months, we'll be discussing these issues, but we will discuss them not statically, but as part of raising human consciousness in order to transform society. And to raise along with the people, is social change feasible and possible? And what are the paths to an American revolutionary transformation? We will be doing what a lot of people claim they want to do, but can't quite figure out how to do it. How to go to the masses of people and discuss the burning questions of all of our lives at a time of crisis, like you said, where there aren't many options, either change and revolutionary change or the abyss.
Right.
I don't think such a conversation has been held with the people of Philly, or for that matter, the people of this country. Along with the issues that are already raised, and a part of this next stage will be to propose a new aesthetic, which is not always that new when you think of Barbara Bullock and Sun Ra and Bobby Womack and Donny Hathaway, and this great body of art and music. We will be in a conversation with musicians, artists, dancers, and poets of Philadelphia, and I think this will be a great opportunity. I'm reminded of the inauguration and the art that was presented, and we couldn't put on full display what we sometimes do, but Serafina, Rumia, and I have to say, I look forward to more extensive discussions with Rumia, who is finding a way to synthesize classical Indian dance, which goes back thousands of years, with the American crisis. And, you know, this idea of I know why the cage bird sings, being interpreted through classical Indian dance, is no small matter as we go forward. And this is a part of a new aesthetic, actually. I'm certain that Barbara Bullock, the great painter, will find a way to cooperate with us, because I know her and I know the kind of woman she is. And when I read the interview that she had, it sounds like she was talking the same language we're talking, you know? And then, of course, Alfie Pollock, who is much greater than is acknowledged.
Right.
He is a real treasure and a virtuoso, you know, and that was on display. And he said to Michelle, I think last Sunday, called her and said that he feels that the free school is angelic. Am I?
Yeah, he said the free school is made up of angelic beings.
Yeah,
And he said, and you all deserve only the best, so I tried to give you my best when I prayed.
yeah. I don't take that lightly at all. It's humbling.
No.
And he called you
Yeah.
to say this. It's not as though, you called him. Just, quickly, we're going to have to define what is revolution. It's a word that's been appropriated and distorted. Sadly, it is associated with the ultra-left, almost crazy people, and the meaning that it had in the time of the Third American Revolution, because we always referred to that struggle, and King and all of them did, as a revolution, as it were. Hold on, let me get a tissue out of here. My nose is always running. I got some here. But if you have the correct revolutionary chronology, thank you, can one understand that the Black freedom movement, especially of the 50s and 60s, was an American revolution, which did not achieve state power and thus leaves incomplete that question, which we will have to address. But it was nonetheless a revolutionary movement, yet incomplete. You can only understand that if you have the proper revolutionary chronology. Most leftists, and I mean sincere leftists, start the modern or contemporary revolutionary chronology with the Russian Revolution. However, to understand properly the modern revolutionary process, you have to start with the Civil War and Reconstruction. That chronology then places the epoch of revolution in a place that is not consigned first and primarily to European matters. And Baldwin and King and all of those, Malcolm, they all understood that the Second American Revolution was incomplete, it was defeated, and that it required a Third American Revolution. However, the epoch of revolutionary change, the history of revolutionary change, begins with Reconstruction. That situating things in that way then makes it possible in this literacy campaign, which I want to revisit, not to change, but to expand. We come to the people of Philadelphia with a new chronology which situates them in the center of modern history. What does it mean? Okay, it's a terrible thing that Baldwin has been erased. That people have no access to this, enormously important thinker. Young people don't. It's not taught in college. He's seen in certain narrow identity politics ways. However, the proper revolutionary chronology situates him in the revolutionary process, the world revolutionary process, in a way that most communist, Marxist, Leninists, including myself, could not see. And once you see, and I know I'm repeating myself, forgive me, the positionality of Reconstruction in the world revolutionary process, then it all falls into place. Baldwin makes all the sense in the world. In fact, brings another level of clarity to what Marx and Lenin were trying to do, which means that, how would I put this? They have to be contextualized. What is the context for understanding them? And my point is the context to understand them is the context that establishes Baldwin, we're talking Baldwin here, establishes Baldwin as a central revolutionary figure of modernity. And that's what we're saying. That is what we are saying. So I guess I want to end on this. Love, democracy, revolution, and peace. We have to find ways in our pedagogies, I know it's going to be different at South Philly High School and West Philly High School. You know, Alice and I were working out through discussions how all of this would be situated at Zion Baptist Church, who are very excited, how this will manifest at Moss 12 or the Black Writers Museum, you know, what will this look like, I guess, for the people who will be out at the bookstore in West Philly on 45th Street, because you're going to get a lot of the people who are going to come to challenge not Baldwin, but the free school itself. How dare you do this? You dig what I'm saying? And so we have to be on the top of our game. Who is Baldwin and what is the revolutionary chronology that he fits into? And how does Baldwin clarify, not put Marxism, Leninism, communism, as it were? And I'm not putting communism down, but communism needs more than itself to be relevant to this moment in history. Frankly, to be for real about it, the communists, the American communists, for the most part, did not fully see a path forward in a revolutionary way. Let me just give you an example that I'm talking to. Henry Winston writes Strategy for a Black Agenda to reset the political table for the Communist Party. And that's what, read it, that's what he's doing. He is saying that Du Bois gives context to Lenin in the American situation. You just can't take Lenin and the Russian Revolution and voila, place it in the middle of South Side Chicago or North Philly. It doesn't work. You need an anchorage in South Side Chicago, in North Philly, in the African American freedom struggle. You see, there is no revolutionary theory that is not grounded in one another way in the Black freedom movement and Baldwin. And because see, then there's another level, the agent of history, not just history, the agent, and not as an abstraction. Just like Jerry said, man, and I know all young people, others in preschool, I had no reason to live. This society offered me nothing. I'm highly educated, but what else do I have? And here comes Baldwin, the interior life and the world historic moment. And I'm just saying that that we got something we can do. And if we impact Philadelphia, we can impact this country. You know? And so it is a literacy camp. And in the Cuban sense, in the Chinese sense, in the Black freedom movement sense, that every revolutionary movement is a literacy campaign at the end of the day. It is a conversation with the people. And now the stakes are higher than ever for this country. I agree. The stakes are very high for this country because the ruling class could plunge humanity into a nuclear war under the guise that Putin is trying to build satellites with nuclear weapons in them with no evidence. And so the stakes are high. The urgency is great. And we have to say in no uncertain terms that those people who think this is a joke, that think we are playing, it would be better if you got out of the way.
Yes.
Because we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And there are risks. There are risks. We cannot be naive. The state and the deep state knows its perilous condition. And, you know, we all often talk about the butterfly effect, things that happen far from the, quote, mainstream, that in certain conditions have a profound effect upon and reshape the mainstream. A discourse like this, at a time like this, can change many things because it will change people. But that's all I want to say.
Yeah. I wanted to respond. Well, like, you know, a lot of what you're saying is taking me back in some ways, actually, to a couple of days before the inauguration, when, like, you know, when we went to Lincoln University, Dr. was there for like, you know, a seminar. But I just wanted to mention this one thing because there was this one like, you know, conversation about a time for revolutionaries and the time for revolution. And like, you know, the professor at Lincoln, Dr. Hawkins, I think she was like, you know, coming from the place that yes, she does believe like, you know, by engaging with the students, she believes the possibility of revolutionaries at all times. And I think there was this, you know, conversation about like, does that imply like what this means for a revolutionary time, or does this mean that every time is a revolutionary time? And I think the conversation sort of resolved in the conclusion that no, there is such a thing as a revolutionary time, which can bring out revolutionaries who.
So can I just clarify that just a little bit?
Yes.
That was a very critical moment in the discussion because, and she was making a legitimate claim that don't say that revolutionaries don't exist at this time and previous times. And I said, no, I was not saying that revolutionaries don't exist in all times, but every time is not a revolutionary time. That's all. Yeah,
Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No. That helps because yeah, I mean that like I feel like many like a lot of.
But the fact that that was even taking place at a Black college at this time was significant.
Yes.
And generate and provoke by a Black woman professor at Lincoln. It was such a proud moment for me.
It was really humbling to watch, the student teacher, dialogue at a college. But, there's a lot to say about that. But the reason I was talking about it now is because the conversation about the purpose of the Year of Baldwin and the literacy campaign is becoming more and more clear, because I think in many ways the question of literacy comes because every revolutionary movement is an opportunity to understand the people, to understand where the people are at. And it is the task of the revolutionary to understand the people in that sense. And going back to what you were saying about the literacy campaign and how we have to make sure that yes, there is a purpose of the Year of Baldwin. It's not simply a celebration of Baldwin and his works, but also the inauguration event itself last week. I agree with what Ranjan was saying too, that this did seem like it was an opening. In many ways, we were asking, the audience and people who attend or watch that, okay, these are the stakes. Are we prepared to take certain leaps that this year and this time demands of all of us? And in that sense, I was thinking of the literacy campaign and the inauguration as this is a place where we ask this question, and throughout the year we are going to be involved in the work of actually developing an answer and testing this theory that yes, people do have the capacity to see that yes, Baldwin speaks to humanity. It makes sense for free school to be full of Asians. It makes sense for Baldwin to be studied not just in America but throughout the world. The world needs Baldwin, and he served a special purpose in uncovering the American revolutionary process to see this. And also the thing that Jeremiah was saying initially about the the fact that even it's so clear at every political event we go to that really the moral authority does come from most of it comes from people who have been rooted in some ways in the Black struggle. But at the same time, this to recognize that is to give up something. It is to give up your sense of it is to give up whiteness, but it is to give up your sense of safety. This is the thing that we are asking the people of Philadelphia and ourselves. That's what I was thinking of in terms of the literacy. Because when you were speaking, I think this is the thing that became clear for the first time that it is a literacy campaign because we are actually talking about understanding something specific. We are becoming literate about something specific, and it is the capacity of the people. It's not,
Well, I feel like this is also where, Baldwin is where literacy and prophecy converge and they meet, because this is something that we talked about in one of the facilitator readings, but part of what it means to be literate in the way that we mean and not in the kind of more formal sense of being able to read books or whatever is can you read the signs of your own life, but more importantly, can you read the signs of history? And I think a way that you could think about it is let's say the slaves during the Civil War, right? They were not literate in the technical sense, but they were literate in a different way because they had a prophetic tradition. And that gave them the ability to see a unique opportunity where neither side saw. The Union Army and the Confederates, neither side actually saw the enslaved proletariat as such. And that basically part of what Du Bois describes during the general strike, the coming of the Lord, all this stuff is that Black people, because they had this prophetic tradition, that it gave them the ability to see certain signs and then to act in a decisive way.
Right.
And Baldwin is in some ways the kind of encapsulation of that, also in the 20th century, the modern epoch too, where like part of what I think Baldwin gives to people is the ability to read. He's like literally like, the fire next time is a work of prophecy in that sense, where he's like talking about that God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water with fire next time. But that is like, Baldwin is giving to the American people the ability to literally read the signs of history and then to act in a decisive way. And I feel like that's where basically it's like literacy means much more than just, can you read a book? But can you actually read like where history is moving, where the world is moving, and read it in a new way, and upon that reading to actually act in a new way, and to become a new kind of person in that sense. But I was just thinking about what you were saying, because I feel like
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, when I listen to Baldwin, I'm taken aback by his references to scripture in the Bible. Having been raised in the church, I understand that as well. And I think what Baldwin is trying to express in all his essays, and as I become more familiar with some of his literary works, he is trying to define for humankind.
Say that again.
All his essays, all his works that I'm reading and becoming familiar with, I think Baldwin is trying to define for all of humanity the existence of the God part in all of us. And when we look at the world right now, I think whether from New York to Amsterdam, from Buenos Aires to Caracas, from Caracas to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to Berlin, from Berlin to Moscow, I think young people and all people realize that the 21st century is a century in which man finally possesses the weapons to destroy mankind. To empty the earth of all life, both animal, plant, and microorganisms. And when you talk about literature, I think that the religions have mastered the institutionalizing literacy more than any other pillar of any institutions. They are the masters at understanding what literacy means in our context. Because we might not really realize it right now. Where we are right now is you're seeing the conflict transpiring between the three Abrahamic religions that are bringing us to the point: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Three faiths that have their root in the Abrahamic faiths. And what we're living out, people who are not Christians, who maybe are not Muslim, who are not Jewish, don't realize that what you're living out is the epoch of the great conflict, the coming of the Mahdi, which is what Muslims believe, you know that. Christians believe the coming of the Messiah. Well, not the coming of the Messiah, but the second coming of Christ. And the Jews are waiting for the Messiah. And this is what has us in this conflict. And I think people who are outside of those faiths, who haven't studied those faiths, don't realize where we are. They're the ones that are setting the political economic agenda and saying that the end is here. The end of existence is here. And what's even, I did some calculations. Over 50% of the world belongs to those three faiths. People don't realize it, and the influence they had in what we're confronting today. We're talking about Gaza, and we're talking about Ukraine. Ukraine, if you look at the history, is where the European Jews come from. I mean, that's their homeland. And so this conflict that we're seeing being played out is a conflict that has been written about since history started to be written 5,000 years ago. And this is the great drama we're living out right now. So when I hear Baldwin, reading the Bible. He talks about the rainbow. The first time the Bible says man was destroyed by water. The second time, when God comes, he will destroy the world by fire. That's what it's referring to. And I think everybody who has any kind of awareness, no matter where you live, no matter your tribe or your ethnic group, realizing this time that we're living in is different. It feels different, it smells different. I know for me and for my children, everybody I talk to feels that we are on the knife edge of something happened and we can't explain why. And that's what Baldwin is so brilliant and prophetic about. By bringing it, by putting it in terms and context, in which we can all grapple with, setting aside anything to do with sexuality, okay? And I think he does a great job of he puts it in compartment, okay? He says, I'm not here to talk about my sexuality. I'm talking about where we are as humanity, okay? And that's what I think brings us all here together, because we realize right now that this is not like no other time. And we're searching, I know we all, I think people are looking for an explanation of how the hell did we get here? How do we get to the point that we have this much hatred for one another, that we're willing to wipe out all of life? And yet we call ourselves learned humans. And we're all living in astonishment. And I have to say, and I think you as well, because we're much older than those that are camped around us. Humanity hasn't been able to sort it out. Why do we hate? Why do we hate one another? Even if everyone is of the same, and we can look at history, even if you're the same race, the same ethnic group, you have the same language and the same religion, you will kill one another. And to me, that's the profound thing that Baldwin draws out. When I kind of did through it all, he says, what makes us like this?
That's interesting.
And that's why, that's what, when you look at where we are right now, you look at world history, you can have if everybody in this room was of the same ethnic group, we will find a way, we will invent a way to divide. And to put it in a microorganism, on a micro level, you see it within families. You have the same mother, the same father. You have a bloodline with your brothers and sisters and your cousins. Yet, there's there is that fraternal conflict that goes on. And so that, to me, that's the genius of Baldwin. He identifies it, and he has us searching for a solution. And I think that's what his great search was. The great question is, why are we here? And his answer was to love one another. And that takes us back to the Bible, because the Bible and the Quran, okay, and Judaism tells us that we're supposed to love one another. But that ability to love one another escapes us to this very point today. And that's what I want to say to you, what you hit upon, the Year of Baldwin and Du Bois, is that fundamental question.
Yeah.
And I thank you for highlighting it with these essays and these readings.
And I think you put it in very stark terms, Joe. With all of the religions and all of the holy scriptures that do tell us to love one another. In fact, the New Testament goes further than any of them by saying God is love. What has prevented the fulfillment of that? And everybody is, like you said, waiting for the return of Christ. I think Christ
And the Mahdi.
And the Mahdi.
And the Messiah.
And the Messiah. And, but see, that's a way of saying we don't have to do nothing. When in fact, properly understood, the return of Christ, the Mahdi, and the Messiah are when human beings realize what you just said, that hate, that we will just, and I agree, I don't want to repeat what you're saying. I think that is the urgency. You presented the urgency of this moment. And I agree with you that a full-scale discussion of these issues through James Baldwin will,
Yeah.
mhm.
And I think, and you, my brother, you're a Muslim brother, right? I think this is a great time to look at the literacy of these great religions that have us where we are right now. Because for me, and I say this all sincerity, my wife's known me, we met when we were in college. I had literally no intentions of ever becoming a Christian, but not a Christian in the context that you understand Christianity has been taught. Okay, not how I was taught in church. Okay, and the same thing, with Islam and Judaism, to understand the literacy they've given us and how we're at this terminal point in conflict. Because even I have very close friends of mine that are from India, one of my business associates from India, and he talks about the conflict even in India between the Hindus and the Christians and the Muslims. So even my Hindu brothers and sisters are not left out of this argument. We are willing to die to commit the most savage, horrendous crimes of one another, yet we say we're human. And that's what touches me about Baldwin. His question is, how can you do this? How can you do this?
Actually, I want to respond in a bit because I actually think what Baldwin is saying is about Americans and whiteness and not humanity being at war with each other. And I do think that there's a difference between what we're putting forward as the, or what Baldwin is laying forward as not a battle of religions of the modern epoch, but actually along the lines of whiteness and colonialism and imperialism and how that has divided the world. Because I don't think, like in India, Pakistan, this division along religions has been something that's natural. Because, and like, what is the root cause of it is the question. And what we have studied is that this division has been due to Western imperialism, colonialism.
Yeah.
And that's important to make because I don't think Baldwin is saying that Americans and the rest of the world are all the same in its responsibility towards humanity. There has been, and that's important because there is, and this is not arrogance, but actually there is a unique task that Americans have to figure out on the world stage.
Right.
It being the major purveyor of violence, as King says.
Right.
And I think this question around religion actually distracts from that being the central point.
Yeah.
Because even in China, again, I mean, I'm American, so I don't completely understand the situation there. But even in China, like, there are different religions. And an argument of the West is that China is persecuting or individuals along religious lines, which is not true. And that's important because it supports the fact, or it goes against or refutes the fact that people naturally divide themselves along religion, along race. And yeah, and even within families, yes, Baldwin says that there's a lot to work out, but he says that there is hope because even in this family where Black families have been under such attack, they find a way to love each other.
Right.
And yeah, and this is also the conversation that he has with Nikki Giovanni, where Baldwin is talking about his father and how his father was a difficult man for him growing up as the child of someone who has been so, had to work with the white man, had to know that he came from a people that were once enslaved. Despite how his father was very harsh with him, Baldwin has said, there were moments in which I saw love from him. And it was those moments that kept me believing that he is my father, and there's something about my history and his history that continues to affect me.
Right.
And I think that's entirely, like, that means something different about what we are to do for the future.
I want to put a post note on that. In America and in Europe, you cannot separate Christianity from whiteness. If you look at the history, Christianity became Romanized. It was a Mediterranean religion. It became Romanized, or Latinized, or Europeanized in the 3rd century.
Yet Black people separated Christianity from whiteness.
No,
and that's
no, because, and I said it wrong. If you talk, I got all families Christian. If you go to Christian Black homes, you'll see a picture of Martin Luther King and a white Jesus Christ. Black people.
What do you mean a white Jesus Christ?
They have pictures in their room. Yeah, if you go to people's homes, they have Martin Luther King. They used to have Martin Luther King, JFK, and the white Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
That was in all our homes. My wife, when I went to your house, you had one. All my friends had one. If you talk to Black people now that go to mainstream Black churches, they will tell you that Jesus is white. Okay? And if you tell them that Jesus isn't white, they say, no, that's not important. Okay? And even when you go to, I worked in Africa. And Africa today, the Africans will tell you everybody knows Jesus is white. And so your experience might be different, but the conflict right now is that the European, the white man in America, they see themselves as God. Okay? If you read their writings, they see their job is to civilize the rest of the world in their image, which is the image of God, which is white. That's why you see all these effigies around. But I'm going to end it there. I mean, I've been around white folks for a long time. My people we've been colonized them. We've been colonized differently than China has been, but they actually believe it's actually a term for it. It's called supersessionism, which means supersessionism meant that after when the New Testament and the Old Testament ended and Christ came, supersessionism meant that the white people, the Europeans, replaced the Jews to conquer the world. It's called supersessionism, and it's part of the whole fabric of the European Empire, which, that's why their churches are white. That's why they have stained glasses of Jesus being white. The angels are white. Everything in heaven, in the white world, the angels are white, Jesus is white, God is white. If you look at me, you're looking at God.
Yeah, but the fact stands is who goes to church?
Well,
and for what reason do people go to church?
I'm saying we have.
No, because the interjection that Alice is making is the fact that you also see white people in this room too.
Right.
Are they those same people who believe that they are God, or are they trying to be something different?
Yeah.
The fact still stands is that people. The fact still stands with the purpose of Baldwin to try to love despite.
Yeah.
Or it's like having an argument with someone that you don't like,
right.
And then you realize that they have kids too. What makes it possible for them to have kids? It's not like the kids are, you know what I'm saying? At the whip's end or whatever, like it's their fault that their parents are, or,
No, I'm not saying
it doesn't signify, but still the same point stands. What is possible is the fact that we, as what Baldwin was saying, made Jesus out to be somebody different than what he was expected to be. We turned him out, which is also the point that all of our inheritance is the fact that not only because America became what it is, because there was somebody who was not human, who actually, despite it all, still loved, and because of that is human, advanced humanity forward anyway, that we all turned out. You know what I'm saying? Like we all are now turned out, and we can use what we know. We can use what that means, that if God is love, then why not serve it? That's the point.
Yeah.
One second, Joe. I also wanted to add was there must have been a reason why the boy and king called Gandhi the manifestation of Christian values at their best, right? I do think when we talk about Christianity, when we talk about Islam and Judaism for that matter, we are not really talking particularly about the ways in which a certain section of people who are aligned with the ruling elite practices these values. And I don't necessarily think Judaism is in conflict with Christianity and Islam in this moment. Because if you heard Nate Kleiman, when he spoke, he's been organizing and working with the Jewish Voice for Peace for a long time. And I don't think he thinks he's in conflict with Islam or with Christianity right now. I think there is a consensus of what is the moral way to move in the world right now. What we can say is Zionism is in conflict with all these values that are moral. I think that is the point that we are making over and over in Free School. And it's hard for me to interpret this particular historic moment we are living through as a crisis happening in the realm of religion or, in particular of the Abrahamic religions or so. That's not how I see this crisis, really.
Next question. Okay, and maybe you can help me work through this. Iran sees the West, not just the United States, as the great Satan. And they feel that there needs to be, they need to bring on the Mahdi, the expected one. The Christian community wants to bring on the end of days to bring back the Messiah. Not the Messiah, but the second coming of Christ. The Jews are looking to bring it in to bring the Messiah because all their teachings talk about when this great cataclysmic event takes place on earth, that each one is expecting their deliverer. Yeah, these people right now, whether you want to believe it or not, they are in control of the switches. Okay, both economically, politically, and nuclearly speaking. And they're being driven by their belief system. What you see right, they're being driven by their belief system. In Judaism is very fractured. It's a very fractured community. Same thing within the Christian community. Same thing within the Muslim community. But there are people that have a belief that this is the eventuality of humankind for this conflict. And what I'm saying, only thing I'm saying is that when I look at history, okay, the whole purpose for colonialization of the people of color it wasn't because they didn't practice Christianity, but they had an imperial white Christianity that basically said that we are to impose ourselves, our beliefs, our culture on you because we're made in the image of God. That's what, if you look at their writings, the Catholic Church is deeply embedded in that, deeply embedded in it, okay? I'm not saying I'm not saying I'm right, but if you look at what's going on right now in the world, we're talking about people going to war is because they have those belief systems. The Philippines, the reason the Philippines they open up those 2 bases, the Philippines is deeply Catholic. That's why they gave those bases. That's why those bases are there. And so the way you see the world right now, if you look at the religions and look at how they see things ending and get a map, if you start to map it out, you'll see they're moving those pieces based on what their beliefs are, where we are. And so when I read Baldwin, I see Baldwin trying to, he talks about the issue of whiteness, but you can't separate whiteness from their white God. And it wasn't until I separated your white God, your white Jesus, from when I read the scriptures that made me a Christian. Other than that, I was like, no, I'm out. Okay, it wasn't until I read the Bible that I care about people, your lives, and your children, and everything that makes them human. Because the Bible told me that we're one humanity from two people, and biology has proved it out. We are descendants from a man and a woman. Okay, so then I had to question everything. So we're way beyond. When you think about it, as human beings, we all want the same thing, and that is right now we want peace, no more war, no more war. And they all believe, all three religions believe that their Messiah, their Mahdi, or the second coming of the Christ will bring about world peace. And they believe without this great cataclysmic event, the world peace that we want will not come. So they're pushing the pieces together because people believe that. And we know history. People have died for what they believed in. Look at the Crusades. Look at the world. Let's look at the world around us. So that's why we're being pushed to this epic event, and that's why you see the slaughter taking place in Gaza. And they interviewed a senator, and he openly said, "Kill them all." He had no repose about that. Why? Because his belief is that you can kill them. They can, that's what they believe, and they won't stop.
Yeah, but I feel like part of what the thing is, like, I don't even disagree with you on like most of what you're saying, because it is true that, like, let's say like the Christian evangelicals in Congress, like you're saying, who are like, yeah, kill them all. Like, they are acting out in their own minds, like you're saying, they're acting out like the whole Armageddon thing, And I do think that has to be taken seriously. But I feel like part of what I feel like there's like a tension in like even like what you're saying and like the conversation we're having is it that these things are literally hardwired into humanity, or is it that people have a choice in how they choose to interpret even like the biblical narrative? Because you yourself are a testament to the fact that there's not just one interpretation of Christianity, right? Like, you yourself in the life you've lived are a testament to the fact that like actually human beings are not predestined or predetermined to follow a certain script just on the basis of religion and all that. And I think that part of what I feel like we're like is like, if there's like a pushback, it's on this notion of like, I just don't think that people are, it's not like something that's hard coded into like a human gene or something to be like, oh, like I have to believe a certain thing and like these things are inevitably going to happen. Obviously, people come up with justifications for why they go to war. And I don't think that Baldwin is also not, he's not like idealistic about human history. He knows that people invent many different reasons to do many different things. And religion has been one of the main reasons, the invented reasons that people have for like why the West imperialized the world. And like you were also saying, there's like that Christianity was created as a justification for what the West was already trying to do. If I interpreted what you were saying correctly, and I think that part of it is that like part of what Baldwin illuminates is that like the history of Black people proves that they were able to do something different with Christianity than what was being pushed on them. There is no way that the slaves would have left the plantation if they had blindly just accepted basically the white supremacist version of God that was being pushed to them. And I think that what we're trying to figure out is like, where is there room for human agency in this whole equation? Do people actually have a choice in how they choose? Because even like, I think also this thing about, the three Abrahamic religions and what's happening in the Middle East, like maybe I do think that there's some truth in that, where like many different powerful entities, especially in the West, are acting out what they think is, like a messianic thing. But at the same time, like I think it's in some degree it's like almost like flattening things a little bit to just say that, oh, like this is just a case where like all of these armies are gathering and they're all acting out their apocalyptic vision. Because like if you actually listen to, let's say, like the Houthis, like the Ansar Allah movement in Yemen, they're not acting out like a messianic apocalyptic thing. They're just saying like they're literally doing what I think we also have done in our lives and what you've done in your life, which is to be like, no, like my religion, Islam, teaches me that like if someone is being oppressed, like I have to act to help them. Like that is a very basic thing, and I feel like it's almost like it flattens it a bit to just be like, oh, like they're all just acting out their own fantasies of like the second coming or the apocalypse. When I think that there's actually differences in terms of how different groups of people actually interpret and project their own purposes onto, like, let's say, like a biblical narrative or onto the narrative of the Quran and all that stuff. And I think that basically what I feel like I'm trying to say is that people have agency, that they are making choices. And I think it's a mistake to assume that people are destined to basically act out like some kind of fantasy and basically destroy humanity as a result. Because then it's like, well, then why are we doing anything that we're doing if we believe that it's all just going to happen anyways, you know?
I think also there are sort of two forms of prophecy, or like two modes of religion. And part of why I'm thinking about this is Meghna, like a while ago, made a YouTube comment saying that the discussion of Baldwin and modernity is really important. She said Baldwin, like Eastern revolutionary thinkers, argues that love will complete our human strivings, and that leftist tradition doesn't have this. But I think even in the way that we've been framing the Year of James Baldwin as God's revolutionary voice, and the way that we've been talking about prophecy is actually like a very modern way of thinking about it, where we're saying like we're saying that there is history and that human beings are the agents of history, and that religion has like a role in that, and basically giving faith or like giving structure or giving some sense of what the future holds. But I think that I would just contrast, I think, this modern form of prophecy, or even the way that I think many of us interpret religion, which is like the moral covenant, or like this sense of like human brotherhood, and that as the achievement that like that is our task. And it's a very modern task in a way. And I just think that there's a contrast between like the ancient prophecy that was like foretold like 2,000, 3,000 years ago, and like we just have to act it out. And there's not really a sense of human agency, because like the evangelical thing is like, oh, this is like bound to happen. And so like we're just players, like, is it like Calvinism? I don't know. It's like one of the religious forms.
I don't think it's like, when I see, in other words, when you look at what the Houthis are doing in Yemen, that is a reflective response to prophecy, because their actions that they're taking in Gaza is based on what they think is a fulfillment of prophecy. You follow me? So the Houthis they're actually responding off another group's religious beliefs, because they believe, all of Israel belongs to them, okay? And so what I'm saying is, it's like, whether we want to admit it or not, we're like in a movie theater and the door's locked, okay? And so what we see an act out on stage, okay, like for the first time, I was really shocked that in Russia right now, there are Russians right now, Russia has a large Muslim population. There are Christian Russians that saying that we need to wipe out all the Muslims in Russia. So it's that tension is building, because your family's Muslim, right?
Mostly.
Okay, mostly Muslim, okay? These beliefs have been passed down, you're talking about for thousands of years. This is not something that you can just kind of brush away, because it's almost becomes part of history's DNA. And what I see Baldwin trying to answer, he talks about what is love, and he said it's God, okay? But the God that we're confronting in these three great religions, based on their interpretation of what love is bringing us to the very precipice of total destruction. When you look at
but can that be avoided? Can it be reversed? Does humanity have the capacity to prevent what some would call Armageddon?
The way I mean, and I'm just looking at the behavior that I see. I don't, I was really taken aback by what I heard was being said in Russia against their own population. That shocked me. And it shocked me. I never thought that I'd hear, and I know there's been conflict between Russians, between the big issues right now in Russia, because Russia, 11 time zones, and it's almost like Yugoslavia was during Tito. You try to keep all these disparate groups together that have different faiths and different religions. And I think one of the great things about China, and I'm not, maybe you can help me understand this, is Confucianism, right? That's kind of like the basics of your civilization state, which is a lot different than what we find, and I'm learning about this, and you can help me say this. Confucianism is a lot different than, I mean, it's not like Abrahamic
I
faith.
agree with you about this unique history of the West,
Right.
of which we Black people are part of.
Right.
And
It's assumed in
this intellectual history of the West is so interesting for our purposes. And that's why, when I listen to Alice and them talk, and they say, well, I go back to China to visit my relatives, but I'm American,
Right.
you know.
Can someone explain it? I'm really fascinated.
Can I just make a small point, if you don't mind? You know, the West is not just a history of religion and the Catholic Church, it's also the history of philosophy, of rebellion, of wars, of civil wars. It is perhaps one of the most complicated histories, and history and time sped up. But I'm very, I find all discussions of the ideological history of the West, like Jerry said, I agree so much with what you're saying, but then I don't agree completely. You see what I'm saying? It is, yes, but not, it's more than that. And that's why even for us in the free school, we cannot, and we don't, and Baldwin didn't, and Du Bois didn't, and King didn't, we can't turn our backs on the the West, as it were, Western civilization. But I agree with Alice. What we reject passionately is imperialism and white supremacy, the way that children and youth, including Black children, and you're right about this, and most people would say, you mean that Black people still believe that Jesus is white? And you'd have to answer, yes, a lot of Black people do. Not as many as, let us say, 60 years ago, where we had no alternative narrative. But then, of course, King resets the playing field. And I think you would agree with me on this. Part of the pushback from within Black Baptists, and he was a Baptist, was the idea that he challenged that Jesus was white. I mean, it's so interesting. And this, if I might just say for everybody, this is a little known part of the history of Black people, that there were Black Baptist ministers who saw King as going too far and saw the civil rights movement and Abernathy and all those people going too far in their claim that Jesus was not white. And then I just one other thing, because I think King is so important, and I think Baldwin, all of them, so important in the intellectual history of the West. In some ways, the intellectual history of Christianity in the West is not the same as a result of the Black freedom movement. And can I just give an example? I don't want to talk too much. Okay, we're in a Unitarian church. The Unitarians have a stellar history in the anti-slavery, anti-colonial, and civil rights movement. Stellar history, not so much now. We were at an Episcopal church. We might return to an Episcopal church to do some things. the Episcopalians, the Church of England, never opposed slavery, never opposed colonialism, in fact, upheld them. Here you have in Philadelphia, in our own experience as the free school, because sometimes we're back and forth between this religion or this church and the other church. Two churches in Philadelphia, two denominations that have different histories when it comes to slavery and colonialism and civil rights. Theodore Parker, the Unitarian preacher who gave King the words that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards freedom, comes from a Unitarian. All I'm trying to get at is that I know in the free school, we work within this history, and we take a position that I agree with this, that human beings can and must decide at this point. I agree with you, now more than ever, the stakes are too high. And so we have to choose, but we have to create, and this is where I agree with you. We have to enter into the discussion. And we're saying that the people of this country, in fact, the people of the West, must proceed and must think in a different way. This is why I feel at times insulted by people, professors, activists, and others who don't give young people the opportunity to see possibility. For example, take Afrocentrism, which I think is a disaster. I think it's a marketing and entrepreneurial thing for a couple of people, but a disaster. I mean, and then you have people who will say, this is a comparable position to this vast, complicated body of work associated with Baldwin. And you can go to universities, Temple in particular, be a major in African American studies, and never read Baldwin. Never read him.
What's your opposition to Baldwin? Why don't you read him?
Well, they would argue that Baldwin is too much of a, quote, Western man, too Eurocentric. Anything that would uphold Christianity is considered anti-African. I mean, just a whole set of what I consider to be anti-African American claims. Just like yourself. I mean, anyone who would challenge your Christianity and say, well, Joe, you're not really black. How could you believe? If you really want to be black, you have to go back to African spirituality. And they would say, but anyway, Christianity and all the Abrahamic religions come out of the ancient Egyptian system of values and beliefs. But there's some truth. I mean, Noah comes out of the Akhenaten's pharaonic family, you know? So, I mean, there are links, but to say that all these black people who believe in Christianity or Islam are somehow distorted and unconscious and incapable, well, I agree with you. I'll just say, I agree with you about black folk and Christianity, which then I can't speak about how the Africans are handling it. Our history as African Americans with Christianity is not the same as Africa. In fact, a lot of things are different between us and Africa. But I'll shut up, man.
No, I mean, when I look at the West,
Yeah.
how do you sit down in their minds, have a peaceful conversation with God?
Well, but see, let me ask you a question.
How do you have a conversation? How do you have a conversation with God?
Well, see, this is a very complicated question. See, then I begin to think about a guy like Dietrich Bonhoeffer,
Right.
and those people in Germany who established the anti-Nazi church.
That's why they killed him.
Well, of course, because he wanted to assassinate Hitler.
Right.
And so, what is Christianity? Is Christianity the Christianity of the established church who were either silent or supported Hitler, or is Christianity Dietrich Bonhoeffer? And if it is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, then King makes all the sense in the world because he knew Bonhoeffer.
Yes, because Christianity.
I mean, he knew of Bonhoeffer's works.
I've read some of his. I've read about Bonhoeffer.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity is the complete and total extension of white power. It legitimizes what they do. It makes them, because you know what?
This is an interesting question. Christianity is the ideology of the state, or Christianity or religion itself that is separated from the state?
It is the composite
Yeah.
of whiteness express itself in the metaphysical domination of the world. That's what it is. Okay? If you look at, before they became Christians, you know they had Zeus, they had all these gods. When they became Christian, they took all the images that were part of Roman paganism. Those now became the statues of David, the statues of Jesus. They took all those statues and they re-imaged them in Christendom.
Yeah.
Because they had a problem. And see, the reason the Black folks who talk about Christianity, they talk out of ignorance. If you get the Bible and you spend time in the Bible, to be a Semite is Afro-Asiatic. It's not only language, but it's also in what you are, your makeup. Okay, so you can't separate it. But I don't want to belabor the point, but if they found out that God was not white, if God didn't look like a Viking, I'm telling you right now, they wouldn't be Christian.
Well, one thing is for certain, they wouldn't need to be white.
Exactly.
See, that's Baldwin. Then you got Baldwin. See, Baldwin is in the mix.
Right.
You got to put him in the equation.
You're right.
See, this is what is so beautiful.
Yeah.
This little man from Harlem that never had no college. I mean, he jumped in the mix and he said, if there is not a need to be white, you said, oh, he got it. Why would you need a white God? A white God only justifies whiteness.
It does.
And there's the tension. And this is why, wow, I'm being convinced more now.
Do you know there was a white?
Huh?
Do you know?
But let me just make one small point. That's why I'm thinking the revolutionary chronology, how you chronologize revolutionary events in history. And if you start the chronology, modern revolutionary chronology, with the Civil War and Reconstruction, the greatest emancipation, let us say, of the proletariat, before, let us say, the Chinese Revolution. And maybe even a deeper one, I don't know, but if you start there, then the question becomes, the question raised, if Black people are not by nature ordained by God to be slaves, if they can be liberated, then the whole discourse about Christianity and freedom and humanity and whiteness is now on the table to be confronted ideologically. Now, we didn't topple it yet, but then King comes up, the civil rights movement comes up, and all of those people. And then Baldwin, what they are saying, and Baldwin says it, race is obsolete. You're holding on to a dead thing. You can't prove to me you're white just because you say it. You know, it's such a beautiful dialogue. See, this is what I think we take to Philadelphia. And you're right. You go to churches, these issues are not discussed from the pulpit in a lot of churches. Okay, I'm sorry.
My wife, she surprised me one day. She told me that there was an incident that transpired in New Jersey where a white pastor wore an image of a Black Jesus. And what happened?
Wasn't good.
No, yeah, certainly.
And this white guy, because he tried to tell them, he told them, you know, historically, Jesus was a person of color, brown skin.
Right.
And I mean, they went totally ballistic.
Yeah, of course. But like you said, there'll be Black people in certain churches go totally ballistic. However, that is not the end of the story.
Yeah.
See, and this is why we feel confident or feel that we must go forward with Philly Reed's Baldwin. You're right. All of these questions are on the table. But go ahead. I mean, I know Alice wants to stop.
Yeah, well, I think actually essentially what's going on right now, because I'm trying to make sense.
Confusion. Can you explain to me? I'm assuming.
Maybe that could be a separate conversation, Joe.
And but I think essentially what's happening on the two sides of where I'm trying to make sense of this conversation. And I think going back to what Baldwin says, that human beings are complex, there's a side to human beings that can be divided, and essentially there's nothing you can do, it'll just be disaster, they'll kill each other. But I think there's the other side, which we're trying to figure out, is what is the best of human beings? Yeah. And what can we do to bring together human beings? Because there's a question, yes, there's a question of, is whiteness inevitable? Is being in America, does being in America, not just for people who are white or whatever that means, but everyone who grows up in America, is that inevitable? And I think that's where we do agree on the question, which is with Christianity or any of these religions, is it just in your DNA and it doesn't change? Mm-hmm. But I do think what we're trying to do is to build the possibilities of bringing the best of people together. The people who don't think that it's all inevitable, whether it's race, whether it's religion. And it actually speaks to, because you can always reference examples in which religion, race, whatever it is used to the worst of their possibilities. But there are also examples where it brings together people. Like when I mentioned that with Zion Baptist Church with Leon Sullivan, he actually he wanted his congregation to know that actually all the religions are the same and people are the same by having the children go to different mosques, churches, temples. And an example from this past week with the launch of Baldwin is that panel that we had where we brought together Michael Muhammad from the Nation of Islam. We brought together, I guess, Anthony Montero, who's a prior Baptist, Zion Baptist Church. We brought together Nate Kleiman, who is a Jewish man. And in that, if according to the worst of human possibilities, then there would have been tension around the fact that they came from these different religions. I forget, there is religious, yeah, again, following what you're saying, it means that that table should have broken out into chaos because they come from different religions, different assumptions, or different beliefs about what the future means. But instead, even though I was really excited because of how different the panelists are, or quote unquote different, where they come from different segments of society. You also never get to see something like that. Have you ever seen the Nation of Islam with Jewish Voice for Peace? Or any, I don't know, because both of them believe that they're people of the book. Like Nate Kleiman said that, Michael Muhammad said that, but never once in that entire panel, there are questions about other things, which is where are the people at? What is the future of America? But never once did they argue or disagree or come into conflict or hate each other because they each believe that they were people of the book. Instead, because they each believe that they were people of the book, they saw that there's something about liberation, about liberating people, and the moral choice and responsibility that they had to Palestine. And I think that's what we're trying to do in the free school, which is the best of human beings. And actually for the rest of the year, I'm excited because as Tony was saying about Zion Baptist Church, being this major institution, at least, or major institution of the church in Philadelphia, what are the new possibilities that would emerge from bringing that together with the Nation of Islam, this beacon within the African American tradition and history? And I think that's something new, and there are questions, but we can't predict where it's going to go exactly. But I think there is a faith that, similar to the panel that we had last week, that there is going to be more in common than not.
Yeah, I mean,
Can I just say, hey, Joe, can we just see if we got any comments?
Some of the comments deal with also.
Because I think they might impact upon our conversation.
Okay. Yeah, so we had sort of two sets of comments. One was from the very beginning of Free School, which was with the Abandon Biden campaign. And so I think I'm just going to read those first and then go to the religion, because I think it partially informs. Okay, so a lot of people said good morning. BK, Todd, Chris Romero, Pittsburgh Dude 87, somebody new named M Sparks. Emily said good morning. Jacob Carpenter, Magna, James Harden, and others. Amiri. Okay, but then Pittsburgh Dude said, you might say that Israel has spiritually and morally assassinated RFK Jr. I wonder, yeah. Yeah. But there's a series, okay. I wonder if the establishment might start letting out more dirt to oust Biden, or if Obama could convince him to drop out, like he convinced the primary candidates to do in 2020 in order to stop Bernie. They're talking about the Muslim community and the Abandon Biden campaign, and Todd uses the hashtag Abandon Zionism. Okay, Chris Romero said, Trump is an interesting figure in regards to the Gaza conflict. He has had his criticism, but also goes on about deporting Hamas supporters. And Sparks just said, sent a lot of emojis, and then Saturday Free School with the school emoji and then a brown heart. And then Pittsburgh Dude says, yeah, they're talking about, the Muslim community saying, wow, I didn't know that the percentage of Muslims was that high among the Black community in Philadelphia.
Oh, hell yeah.
And then people were speculating about, I think the part of the conversation we were talking about the ruling elite becoming so desperate as to sort of pivot towards world war and the possibility of who will fight in this war if it happens. But Pittsburgh Dude 87 says, Whitney Webb had discussed the possibility of a cyber 9/11 attack that gets blamed on Iran or another official state enemy. And then BK and Chris were sort of talking about who will fight in the military in regards to, I think, Alice's comment about the ads. BK says, a bill in New York was proposed this month to fast track US citizenship to migrants in exchange for military service. And Chris Romero responded, a lot of people in New York City, especially in the more poverty-stricken boroughs, are calling out the recent emphasis on migrants. And so there are more fractures amongst the American people where I guess the ruling class are trying to bring in migrants to be their version of the new American people who will go along with empire, but actually is creating even more of a split between the anti-war American people and the rest. And then he continued, Meanwhile, more of the liberal or cosmopolitan areas accuse people who have concerns over the migrant issue as racist, quoting that so many of us are immigrants, but their excuses can only go so far. There are also constant ads for people who participate in online gaming or adjacent activities where they're desperate for soldiers. And then Meghna says, yeah, she wants to lift up this point about nonprofits as a political crime,
Right.
especially because their electoral wings are 501c4s. And so they're allowed to do political lobbying in service of their mission, where 501c3s can't. And the other thing on top of that is that 501c4s don't have to disclose their donors. And so it's completely like dark money. And she points out Reclaim Philadelphia and Philadelphia 3.0 are 501c4s.
Say that again.
Reclaim Philadelphia and Philadelphia 3.0 are 501c4s. And so they're actually able to do a lot of, I guess, like canvassing, like phone banking, like stuff like that. Yeah, that is really interesting. Okay, and then Amiri says, yes, as Alice said, people are complex. The discourse won't always be smooth or clear, but the ideas have to be worked out together to move forward. Serafina's point about the left's absence of uncertainty reflects the importance of providing an alternative for the youth who are misled, and yet, as we saw, are still full of hope, possibility, and really important questions. BK said, congrats on another successful event. And then I already read Meghna's comment about Baldwin and modernity, and basically this thing of like love and human strivings. But she was bringing it up when you were talking about basically the failures or the deficiencies of the left in America, where if you're just trying to transplant Lenin, it doesn't work in the same way. I don't know. Some of these comments are really short and I don't know what the context is, but okay, BK says, this was in relation to what Joe was saying, but what BK saw in it is that you were talking about the elite influence over mass religion, which I think we sort of worked out. And then Todd says, while I can't say that Joe's wrong, like I think that Lenin's imperialism is also like important to the conversation, which I think we also went through with like imperialism, like the modern epoch and the moral, basically like the moral choice in that. Amiri says, the West is a history of love too. We have to lean into optimism, not fatalistic or narrow projections of what can happen. We can't abandon white people or any people because we reject ideas, not people. Meghna says, Baldwin shows us what it means to be a truly religious and godly person in times of what Martin Luther King called humanity's moral and spiritual lag behind its technological progress. Okay, Amiri said, I encountered missionaries yesterday and declared that Jesus was a poor brown man fighting against a white supremacist empire. We can reclaim and define what faith or religion even is. James Harden says, Jesus was painted in shades of brown. Chris Romero says, I've heard people bring up that Jesus was actually a brown Palestinian. Okay, James Harden says, our shared humanity has been taught a lie about our past. I believe we've knocked ourselves back to the Stone Age several times. And then Chris says, race divides by design. As long as we treat race as fact, we can't see humanity, in my opinion. A good example of the religious divide could be the difference between liberation theology and standard Catholicism. And then Jahan's comment is, it's US imperialism and Zionism that really wants to promote this clash of civilizations narrative, where actually it's the ruling class that's most invested in like this circle jerk of like eternal religions clashing, basically like that's destiny. And also I think it says that human beings can't evolve, that like human beings are always going to like hate on the basis of religion, or that religion is something that is backwards. And Jahan adds, it's the US and Israel that are promoting ISIS, while Iran and Hezbollah died to protect churches. Iranians, they died to protect churches in Syria and Iran. And so he's saying like, we shouldn't project the Western evangelical Armageddon thought onto Muslims or Christians of the East or the Third World, like especially as Americans who are being fed a lot of this propaganda.
Jahan is also Muslim.
Oh yeah, Jahan's also Muslim for context. And he says, look at South Africa taking a moral stand across religious and ethnic lines. Yeah, so that's the end of the comments. But yeah.
Well, it's after 2, and I know Serafina got to get to work. I hate to see you go.
Yeah, we've had a very wide-ranging discussion today. But yeah, we'll be back next week, and thank you to everyone who contributed on the live stream chat. As Emily says, we always appreciate it, and yeah, we'll see everyone next week.
Yay.
Bye.